Game of Thrones Season 8. Wait, before I start, you might want to adjust your volume if you're listening to headphones. Maybe turn this down to about halfway. But Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 1 just got here, and after watching it about 3 times, I want to discuss some things that you may or may not have missed. Now, right off gate, I've already seen a few critics talking about how the episode was sort of a waste since we only have 6 episodes remaining in the season. But in this video, I'm going to explain why that's not true. Traditionally, the first episodes of Game of Thrones seasons are always the build-up, and this final season will be no different. They're setting the stage for something massive here, and it would seem stupid if we just rushed into all that with not having taken care of a few events of the past, and also reuniting certain characters and dealing with some of the internal conflict and some of the struggles or the baggage of what those characters have been through. Those issues need to be dealt with before we can move forward with the battle between the living and the dead. Now, I will be mentioning some potential spoilers in this video, so as always, here's your sign and let's begin. Before we get started, please slap a like on this video as the like goal is going to be 2,420. Also, make sure you're subscribed and then make sure every notification's turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Long night. Now to begin with, I feel like I need to get this out of the way just to sort of work through my thoughts on this, and then I can move on with the rest of the video. And that goes by the name of Sansa Stark. What are you doing? Daenerys is not doing anything in the north but just trying to help you. I understand you're being protective of your family. You guys have all been through some shit, so it's to be expected you're not going to trust anyone who comes trotting into Winterfell, whether that be on Dragonback or with the massive army. The fact that Daenerys opens the table by coming into you playing no games, just being straightforward with you, letting you know you're more beautiful than your brother bragged about, and also Winterfell, your home, is gorgeous. Thank you, in other words, for letting us into your home. Sansa interprets this open and forwardness as a sign of weakness, and she says very formally that Winterfell is yours, Your Grace. When I first saw this in that promo back in December, I accepted this from Sansa. I realized that Sansa is the best game player next to Cersei since Littlefinger's dead, so when Daenerys arrives, it's not going to be any different. I accepted her saying Winterfell is yours, Your Grace, because I ultimately took that as her showing a sign of respect to Daenerys. That's actually not the case. She's nothing but cold to her. Before I go too far down this rabbit hole of what will ultimately be interpreted as Sir Hunt's hating on Sansa because he just hates her character, that's not the case. I love her character. I love the fact that she's brought herself up from nothing. But before I go too far down that rabbit hole, I need to explain to myself and anyone who's watching who doesn't quite get it, this is just the first episode. We've seen 56 minutes of what will amount to be nearly 7 hours. We need to look at this as though it's a movie and we've only seen the opening act. We need to wait to judge until the 3rd or 4th episode. Just like last season, I was ready to jump on Arya when I saw the way she was treating Sansa. I said, Arya's gone batshit. She needs to be checked immediately because she could kill Sansa. Until a few episodes later, and we saw that the long burn of that entire Winterfell plot was to kill Littlefinger and to keep us guessing and on our toes. I know eventually Sansa will come around and get in our good graces. Her and Arya seem to be playing this particular game of not trusting Jon, but we all know that there's death looming around the corner. What that means is put aside your differences and come together, or stay alone and die. The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. It's easy to hate on Sansa for the mistakes she's made in her past, but ultimately she's become one of the best players. She uses the skills the only way she knows how, and she may not fight the same way as others, and I think that's why it's easy for me to misinterpret her character sometimes. The key thing we need to take away from all that is that it's only been 1 episode. Let's wait until we judge. And the next thing I want to talk about is my favorite moment in the show in its entirety. Now, I know I'm going to switch this around in future videos, but as of right now, this is literally my favorite moment of anything ever. Jon Snow riding Rhaegal, aka his daddy's dragon. He goes, what do I hold on to? And Daenerys says, whatever you can, motherfucker. Then, the greatest thing in anything ever happens for about 30 seconds. Jon Snow rides Rhaegal. This is going to happen again, obviously, later on in the season, and I feel like it will happen in Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 3. I still am just trying to let it sink in, and Jon Snow rode a dragon. Jon Snow, a half Targaryen, a half Stark, literally ice and fire, is now riding dragons. And if I do say so myself, towards the end of this whole scene, Jon literally is able to control the direction the dragon goes. He's a fast learner. Now, when I say his daddy's dragon, a lot of people know this, but Rhaegal is named after Jon Snow's father, whose name is Rhaegar. Daenerys named both of her dragons in Drogon after Khal Drogo, but 2 of her dragons, Viserion and Rhaegal, are named after her 2 brothers, Rhaegar and Viserys, who we saw die in Game of Thrones Season 1 by receiving the Golden Crown. scene. Now, what I want to mention about the end of this scene is that when they land on the dragons, one thing that's easily missed is that this is literally a callback to Jon Snow all the way back in, I believe it was season 3, with Ygritte when they had cave sex. Daenerys mentioning the line of 1,000 years we could stay here is very similar to the conversation that Jon and Ygritte had, where they mentioned that they could stay in the cave forever. And since we're on the subject of mentioning things that are easily missed, right around this same time during the episode, after Jon Snow and Daenerys share a kiss, the camera jumps to Winterfell and we get to see Arya and Gendry reuniting for the first time, alongside a quick reunion between Arya and Sandor. Now, I will say that I thought that was going to be a bit more eventful, but they are in the same place and they're going to be interacting, I'm pretty sure, more so in the second episode. But right as the Hound comes up to take his axe from Gendry, we notice that Gendry is able to forge dragon glass into a liquid state. But what they're showing us here is the fact that Gendry is able to make such a massive thing like the Hound's axe, he's also able to make other things that are maybe even larger. Something, in my opinion, that could lead us to a bolt that is big enough to take out Viserion. And the reason why they put this scene in there is to not only show us that Gendry's skill is increased in what he can forge and what he can make, but also that it's possible to make dragon glass into something big enough to take down the Night King and his dragon. Another thing that may have been easily missed is Gendry is asked by Arya to make her a spear. We get a close-up of this image and it shows not only a spear, but that it's detachable. If you reference the trailer, this is what Arya uses when fighting against the dead in the battle for Winterfell. This calls straight back to her training in Braavos, where she was blind and had to fight the waif using her stick. Now, I feel as though I need to correct myself here. For almost 2 years, I've been saying that Arya will not be the type of person that will be susceptible to a relationship, especially with Gendry when they reunite in season 8. But after the moments they shared together on screen in episode 1, I kind of feel like she might be. He does get her to giggle when, even though she tells him not to call her Lady of Winterfell, he says, "Okay, my lady." She remembers that that was something that he said to her way back in Game of Thrones, I think it was season 2, where he mentioned that if there was a different situation, then you would be my lady. Basically saying that he would date her. Now, Gendry hasn't told her that he's actually a Baratheon, and if we're following in line that the Targaryens lost the Iron Throne, then he would be next in line for the Iron Throne. He hasn't shared that with her, and I doubt that he will. But all that aside, one thing we have to remind ourselves is that when characters disappear for a while and come back and are given an arc and basically we care about them again, they're quickly taken away from us. So I hope these scenes that are shared with Arya and Gendry, especially since we see Gendry in episode 1 and there's a massive battle coming up and we know that his skills are a necessity for the end game, and not to mention he also has some sort of a claim on the Iron Throne. I hope this isn't all leading up to the fact that Gendry will die during the battle for Winterfell. You all let me know what you think about that down below in the comment section. Now's the part in the video where we stop talking about the lighthearted stuff and we have to bring on the major events from the episode that strictly mean in-game. But one thing before we move on to that part that I want to mention is Yara's alive, and all those people that commented on my video telling me that, well, the actress said she wasn't going to be in the last season, well, go suck it. She was in it. She had a few scenes. I think they're going to Melisandre her in the fact that she's in one episode and she'll be out all the way up until maybe the 5th or 6th episode. Now, wait. The tinfoil is lighting up, and I kind of just thought of this literally as I'm recording this video. There is a moment in, I think it was one of the promos that Amazon released at the end of March. We're given a new shot of Daenerys, and there were a bunch of sleuths online who saw a few dots over the fireplace of the room that Jon and Daenerys are in this scene, and they immediately jumped to the fact that that fireplace looks exactly like the one in Dragonstone. Well, let me propose this idea to you. Since we found out that Yara is headed back to the Iron Islands and Theon is going to be headed to Winterfell, maybe the reason why that's mentioned is because after the battle for Winterfell, Dragonstone, Cersei's not an idiot, is taken over by Lannister soldiers, so the only place that Daenerys has to go is to the Iron Islands. Maybe this is the same fireplace that we saw Balon rather, Theon and Yara speaking in all the way back in the earlier seasons from Game of Thrones. And just throwing up a quick spoiler warning here, skip ahead about 30 seconds if you don't want to know anything about the leaks for Game of Thrones Season 8, but there was a plot leak that came out early on that mentioned that there will be a return to the Iron Islands. At some point in Game of Thrones Season 8, we will get to see a scene in the Iron Islands, and no one really knew why, but according to that plot leak, Yara and Daenerys were a part of that scene. Since we're discussing the Greyjoys, one thing something you may have missed in the situation or the scene between Yara and Euron, that is kind of similar to the situation between Victarion Greyjoy and Euron Greyjoy in the novels. In the show, I don't think Victarion is a character, but in the books, Euron is not the only uncle of Yara and Theon who survived all the way back during the Greyjoy Rebellion. Now, I sort of messed this up a little bit in my live stream because my brain was scrambled, but in the books, Victarion gets a gift of a dusky woman from his brother Euron, and it seems as though the show's version of Euron is sort of taking on the aspects of Victarion as well. But there's a moment in that scene on the TV show in episode 1 of season 8 where Yara and Euron are talking, and we're given the impression as though he's done this quite often since we last left him in Game of Thrones season 7. So this means that Yara may have a little bit of information on Euron, and the fact that he offers her wine and she sort of shrugs it off is another nod to the books and the fact that in the novels, all of Euron's gifts are poison. But I feel like I could be reading into this situation so much that I was grasping for straws of the fact that the show is still sort of relating to the book somehow, even though they've passed them for 2 seasons now. But just sort of getting on to the heavier stuff, towards the end of the episode, after Sam finds out the fate of not only his brother, but also his father by Daenerys, which I did discuss in depth, and you can click right here and that'll take you to a link to my live stream breakdown. But right after Sam finds out that news, he rushes out to the courtyard and he runs into Bran. He asks Bran what he's doing out there, and Bran mentions that he's waiting for an old friend. At the end of the episode, we find out, and this might be something that you missed, that his old friend is Jaime. This next part will contain spoilers, so go ahead and skip ahead a few minutes if you don't want to know anything about potential leaks from Game of Thrones Season 8. Now, like I mentioned earlier, there has been a long-running theory almost the entire time that Game of Thrones has been off the air that Tyrion will betray Daenerys at some point during this season. Now, according to a leak that I was sent several months ago, this betrayal begins in the form of Jaime arriving to Winterfell. Upon Jaime's arrival to Winterfell, he's immediately thrown into a cell, which, judging on the promo that we've seen for the second episodes of Game of Thrones Season 8, it looks as though this may happen. Daenerys does not seem happy, and she mentions how her and her brother used to basically fantasize about all the many different ways they would kill the executor of their father. Well, according to that leak, Jaime is placed in a cell upon first arrival to Winterfell. Tyrion then convinces everyone to free him, and later on in the season, this is what Bran uses to manipulate everyone into blaming Tyrion for Jaime's betrayal. Apparently, during the Siege of King's Landing, Jaime sneaks word to Cersei before they even arrive there, and she's able to escape. Now, I've covered that before in videos in the past, and check the link down below in the description for a link to that Bran destroys everything video. And now on to the less spoilery, but still equally as heavy stuff that happened in this first episode that I think needs to be discussed. Towards the end of the episode, Tormund, Ed, and Beric all find the Umber Boy, and this is in the Last Hearth, which at the beginning of the episode, he was sent by Sansa to use more wagons to go and get the rest of his people into Winterfell. They find this same boy pinned to the walls, and if you're saying you recognize that symbol, that's the same symbol that was used at the creation of the Night King. We can see it right here on the Children of the Forest wrist pads, and again here, left by the White Walkers in the very first episode. And to simplify all this means one thing. The Night King was created under the precursor that he will destroy everything, and that's what this message is relaying to not everyone in particular, but more so to Bran. The Night King has a target, like mentioned by Vladimir Furtick, the actor who plays the Night King. He mentioned that the Night King will have a target this season, and I think this message was left for one person in particular, that being Bran Stark. He's coming to destroy not only everything around him and everything that gets in his way, but he's coming to destroy Bran. Everything that has to do with his creation, he wants revenge on. Bran's powers have been imbued to him by the Children of the Forest. His magic is linked to the Old Gods, and the Old Gods, in my opinion, is the same magic that's keeping the Night King alive and allowing him to resurrect so many undead creatures. Everything in this show and in this universe is cyclical in nature, and what better to portray that to everyone by using this spiral symbol. And one thing that was easily missed from this whole situation is early on, the White Walkers were initially supposed to talk. They were said to have voice that would resemble ice crackling. Now that was snuffed in favor for screeches, and that's what this kid, Ned Umber, does on this walls. He screeches. I don't think this means anything other than pain, death, and destruction. That's one thing that your subconscious links to when they hear screams, such a high-pitched frequency like that, is pain, death, and fear. And I think that's what the showrunners are trying to portray to us, that the Night King is coming, and he's bringing the gift of death for everyone. Now, the biggest, most important scene of this episode, aside from Jon riding a dragon, I feel like is definitely the conversation between Samwell and Jon Snow. Jon finds out his lineage. His ultimate reaction to that is this information is treason. He knows that this this kind of information got his father, who he thinks is his father, beheaded way back in season 1. And the way that this information is delivered to Jon is all wrong. This whole situation is all wrong. Bran is playing the long game. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, Bran has a master plan for everyone. The way that he just has this blank stare and we never saw him warg not one time in this episode lets me know that his powers have advanced to the point where he can just look at someone, see their past, present, and their future. And the way that he looks at Daenerys has me more worried for anything more than anyone. Bran is upset with Daenerys, and he saw that she basically handed the Night King his greatest weapon, and he probably has the fear that this will happen again. He may have seen a version of the future where this does happen again. I could be wrong, but it seems as though Bran is purposely doing things a certain way to make events happen, so that way in the end it will look as though they just unfolded and he had nothing to do with it. It may seem as though Sansa is the greatest threat to Daenerys, but that may actually be Bran Stark. And you know what? We really should start calling him who he actually is, and that's the Three-Eyed Raven. And just sort of touching back on that scene between Samwell and Jon Snow where he's being told about his true lineage, I thought that that whole thing would go down wrong. I thought that one of the biggest things we had to worry about for the first couple episodes was just Daenerys and Sansa and everyone else sort of getting along. I thought the Northerners were going to be who gave Daenerys the harshest time, not Jon Snow's closest family members. But what it turns out to be, the biggest threat to Jon and Daenerys is actually Jon Snow's lineage reveal. I think the first person Jon is going to go and confide with will not be Daenerys. He's likely going to seek outside help and advice for what he should do in this situation. This will immediately drive a wedge between him and Daenerys. But you know, on second thought, Jon did mention last season that he's sick of all the games that everyone's playing. He mentions that if enough people start telling enough lies, then no one will be able to tell the difference between what's real and what isn't. If Jon's gonna practice and preach this same philosophy, then maybe he'll surprise us all and tell Daenerys immediately. Maybe they'll be able to set aside those differences. Jon will tell her, hey, I don't want the throne is yours. I think the weirdest part is that we're aunt and uncle. Are we going to continue this relationship? They clearly love each other dearly, and in that time period, I don't really know if it's going to be frowned upon the same way a relationship like that would in modern day standards. I think they're going to stay together. I just don't know how far apart the news of Jon Snow's true lineage will drive them. And since we're doing pretty well for time in this video, I just want to quickly mention some of my favorite moments from the episode. First up, Jon Snow's meeting with Arya. It went pretty much exactly how I expected it to. Arya is all about her family. She's all about everyone being a wolf pack. So of course she's going to sort of test Jon in the end by reminding him that we are his family. And it's kind of funny because Jon wasn't expecting that. He thought that for sure she would be in on the talking shit about Sansa party, but Arya wasn't trying to hear none of that. Arya responds that Sansa is one of the smartest people she's ever met. No, Sansa is the smartest person she's ever met. The fact that Jon asked her if she's had to use her sword a few times to kill people, and she's like, yeah, I may have had to use it once or twice. That was adorable to me. Arya is a cold-blooded killer and is likely has a body count just as high as Jon Snow. On a side note here, I wonder if all of this sort of inner turmoil that may be coming up later on this season between Jon Snow choosing Daenerys maybe over the Starks, I think that could be setting up for something major, or it could be setting up for nothing, just like it did last season when the Starks were beefing, but they set aside their differences and ultimately killed someone who was against them, that being Peter. Another scene that I enjoyed was at the Great Hall in the meeting in Winterfell where Daenerys finally checks Sansa, where Sansa's bitching and complaining about what do dragons even eat. She didn't plan on having to feed dragons, and she says, what do they eat? Daenerys says, whatever the hell they want. And I bet what they're setting up here is during the Battle of Winterfell, there will be a moment where Sansa will witness how powerful the dragons are and how necessary they are in their fight against the army of the dead. She'll likely get saved by one. Or I wonder if there's not maybe another scene where she gets a chance to get up close to a dragon and the dragon sort of snarls at her because it can feel and sense that animosity that she has towards Queen Daenerys. Another thing that I enjoyed from this episode was the scene between Euron and Cersei post-sex. Euron pulls a straight up modern, unconfident guy and starts comparing himself to all of Cersei's former lovers. And she seemingly is pretty honest with him. I think one thing that we get to see from Euron that we haven't really seen much from his character is a softer, more emotional side. And that's not letting us know that, you know, he's a good guy and maybe he has a good heart that's just been misinterpreted. That's to lead us on into thinking that he's a sensitive person that is not within his power to betray Cersei. I'm pretty sure he will be one of the first people that betrays Cersei. You could just sort of sense that, especially when he tells her that he's gonna put a prince in her belly. Cersei makes this look like, not so fast. I can see a situation coming to a head at the end of this season where maybe Euron and Cersei are facing off against Jon Snow, Daenerys, and a few others in the crypt, and maybe she's got got the Mountain and Euron fighting for, making one last ditch effort, and then the news comes out that Jaime is the father of Cersei's child. Then Euron pretty much abandons everything and goes straight for Cersei's neck, maybe ultimately being killed by the Mountain. Maybe the three of them take all of each other out without Jon or Daenerys having to get their hands dirty. Oh wait, this is Game of Thrones. Never mind. And with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. Alright, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be, you know what, I'm going to bump it up a little bit from earlier. 4,204.20. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then make sure every notification's turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Long night. Super special shout out to every single person watching this video, and a super special thank you to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunt's Reviews. Proceeding with the normal headphone warning. If you were listening to this using earbuds or headphones or anything of the like, you might want to adjust the volume just a wee bit because I am extremely excited. Holy crap! Oh my, so many freaking bombs in this episode. This is probably one of my no, you know what? It is my favorite episode of Game of Thrones. In 8 seasons, 69 episodes, this one comes out on top. Now, I know we are going to be picking up with the Battle for Winterfell next week, and this opinion will likely change, but by far, this is the greatest episode of Game of Thrones. In this video, I'm going to discuss a few things you may or may not have missed, as well as my favorite moments from the episode and what they mean going into the future of this season. Now, as always, here's your sign, and let's freaking begin. Now, before we get started, please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 2,420. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then make sure every notification's turned on, so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Long nights! Now, the very first thing that I want to talk about in this video, aside from Arya popping some side titty, and Jon Snow revealing his lineage to Daenerys, now I will talk about those things, but the very first thing that needs to be discussed is Bran has revealed everything this episode. Like, he told us who the Night King is, what he represents, and who his target will be in this season. Bran has not only confirmed like 10 to 15 fan theories, but he also confirmed that there has been many iterations of the Three-Eyed Raven, and the Night King has done this multiple times. This is almost like a Matrix type of situation where Neo, aka Jon Snow and Daenerys, have to go up against the machine. And just pausing for a second, we gotta give props to Dan and Dave and George R. Martin and every single freaking person who was a part of this show, cast and crew included, all of the people who do the small things on the show, even if you just scoop up trash. Thank you. This is what we waited for. This was literally the epitome of 2 years. We got everything we wanted in this episode. This is what made this show famous. Literally, it's just full of raw emotion, plot closure, amazing one-liners, 1,000 years worth of meme material. In the 54 minutes that I spent watching this episode, I went through a range of emotions, humor, ecstasy, joy, laughter, pure awe. I can't even describe it. I mean, we got to see Arya's side titty. But getting back to Bran, he confirmed that the Night King is able to keep track of his whereabouts using the mark that he made on him back in season 6. And also, as a bit of a side note here, a few months ago before the show came out, the actor who plays the Night King, Vladimir Furtick, confirmed to Entertainment Weekly that the Night King will have a target this season. Well, in this episode, Bran confirmed that he is in fact the Night King's target. Bran is no longer Bran Stark. He hasn't been for a while. He is just one iteration of the Three-Eyed Raven. Now, what's interesting is if for some reason Bran dies this season, it kind of seems like they might be going with that. I mean, Bran's going to be sitting in the, I don't know, I'm getting ahead of myself, but in the next episode, Bran is supposedly going to be in the Godswood awaiting for the Night King, and throwing up a spoiler warning here, giving everyone a few seconds to skip ahead 30 seconds if you don't want to know about this, but some leaks that I've been sent said that this exact same thing happens. Bran waits for the Night King in the Godswood. The leak culminated in Bran dying in the Godswood and then being discovered by Beric Dondarrion. Upon his discovery, Beric gives the kiss of life to Bran, and Bran is able to come back and aid Jon Snow and Daenerys through the remaining few episodes. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen, but if Bran does die, would it not be possible for him to just transfer his essence to another being? The way Samwell was describing death in these scenes, it seems as though he would be open to the possibility of holding mankind's memory. And since we're discussing how the Three-Eyed Raven is the only protection against the Night King and his ultimate reset, Samwell Tarly has long since thought to be the narrator of the story. There are a few people in the fandom, or actually probably thousands of people in the fandom, that think that Sam is the one who is telling the story at the very end, the person who was most most like George R. R. Martin. The author of this series is in fact Samwell. When writing Samwell's character, George pulled inspiration from his own life. And the fact that Bran made a point to say that he has this mark on him and the Night King will always know where he is and how to find him, then it kind of makes sense that Bran passed on his essence and his energy to someone else. Someone who would be willing and receptive would be Sam. It is extremely poetic that Theon will be the one to guard Bran. I really hope that this doesn't mean the end of Mr. Greyjoy here. He had a bunch of lovely scenes with Sansa, and I kind of feel like if they both survive the battle, they may get some things going on. Sansa, one of the most painful things that happened to her, involved something that Theon is missing. Now that we know he'll be guarding Bran, and Bran is most likely going to be taken out by the Night King, I kind of feel like the scene that Theon had with Yara last season could have been their, or not last season, last episode rather, could have been their last moments together in the show. One thing that was easily missed about the moment when Bran is sharing all this information is that he said the Night King knows his exact whereabouts. He knows what he's doing. So if this is the case, how does Bran not 100% know for a fact that the Night King isn't watching and listening in on them right now? The Night King is so powerful, he doesn't necessarily have to warg a subject to know their ever-presence. I am 100% positive that their plan will not go the way they laid it out because Bran knows about it, and that means the Night King ultimately knows about it. And when they plan to take him out after he goes to the Godswood to kill Bran, something's gonna backfire and Daenerys may lose another dragon. Since we're on the subject of things easily missed, early on in the episode, like within the first 15 minutes, Tyrion does about 100 different foreshadowings that he will die at the end of this season. One of the main things that caught my eye, or caught my ears rather, is when he said that by the end of this, someone else, referring to Jorah and Varys, will wear the hand of the Kingpin when it's all said and done. And he's not just talking about the battle for Winterfell, he's talking about also the war for the Iron Throne. He can sense it in his bones, and Daenerys makes it pretty apparent in this episode that his position is in jeopardy. If it wasn't for Jorah sort of sticking up for Tyrion, then she likely would have been extremely salty with him towards the end of the episode, and maybe would have even let him go out on the barracks, like he initially wanted to there. Now, I feel like I need to say this. We're a good little portion into the video, and next week is going to come here before you know it. Episode 3 is going to be the most filled death episode of Game of Thrones. We don't get 2 episodes of the final season and then not have some massive death round coming up. Episode 2 begins with the arrival of the dead at Winterfell, and I can guarantee you that no one is safe. You all let me know down below who you think is most likely to die in the 3rd episode of Game of Thrones Season 8. Now, the next event we need to talk about is Jon Snow revealing his lineage to Daenerys. Now, I'm gonna call myself out. Sir Hunts, you were completely wrong, idiot. The way that this went down was something that I mean, I don't know. The episode was so good, I didn't even look at the tracker, so I didn't realize how much time we had left. And then once this scene starts happening, that's when I checked, and I'm like, wow, they're saving this until the very end. We know the battle for Winterfell is literally going to be starting any second now, and sure enough, that's the way they did it. They never really gave Daenerys time to process it. Now, obviously, we're going to see it more so during the battle, and likely after the battle, but John, that is the worst news to tell someone right before they fly off in the battle. And you saw a preview of her reaction to it, when she says, you learn this information from your brother and your best friend. Don't you think that's a little bit weird? Basically insinuating that Jon may try to usurp her and try to take her position, and I think that's just a natural, normal first reaction. She doesn't believe the information, but once she's given the chance to properly realize it, she'll know that Jon barely wanted the crown of the North. I know the type of person he is. We are in love. He's not going to take the throne from me, and my biggest freaking hint should have been the fact that Rhaegal nodded down and let Johnny Boy hop on his back. No questions asked. That should have been the biggest clue that, hey, maybe Jon Snow isn't a Snow, and it is instead, oh man, this was so good, Aegon freaking Targaryen. And you know, I was thinking about this the other day. That first Dracarys from Jon Snow is going to be nuts. Clearly Dany taught Jon how to do this. So the first time he does it, I think is going to be on a horde of whites. I cannot wait. Episode 3, you can't get here fast enough. Yeah, I say that, but once episode 3 gets here and that first person dies, that first lovable character dies, I'll probably start sobbing like a little bitch. Now, one thing that's easily missed about this whole situation is that all the information that Jon Snow and Daenerys have been told respectively about his aunt, or who he thinks is his aunt, and then Rhaegar, Daenerys' brother, has been so that when they finally come together and piece together the clues, they can deliver that crucial information. So far, Jon doesn't really know anything about his father, but if we look back a few seasons ago, everything that he needs to know about how he was a loving, kind person who was a poet that used to sing to people was told to Daenerys by Barristan Selmy. In my opinion, those scenes were included earlier on in this show for the moment that we just saw in episode 2 of season 8. Now, what's interesting is that Daenerys says that Jon is the oldest living Targaryen male heir. Now, the line of succession, I guess, for the show has been simplified for the oldest male Targaryen. There has been a history of Targaryen heirs, not necessarily going to the oldest male heir, but the oldest heir in general, whether that's a female or a male heir. So I don't really know what's going to happen here. The thing we could sort of look at for some pretense would obviously be Jon Snow's character. Now, if we look at Lord of the Rings, which is what Game of Thrones is ultimately based on, it ends with Aragorn taking on a crown, even though he doesn't really want to. So Game of Thrones looks like it's going to be ending that similar way, but we have to look at Jon Snow's character. He barely took the crown of the North, which is something that he could relate to. He grew up as a Stark, thinking he was a Stark his whole life, so the fact that he was able to wear the crown of the North to a normal person in this time period would have been a happy thing. But Jon did not really want to take on that. So the fact that he's now told that he's not only dating his aunt, which surprisingly he seems to be taking pretty well. I mean, I guess it didn't shock him as much as him being the heir to the Iron Throne, but the fact that he barely wanted to rule the North and is now being shoved 7 kingdoms, I doubt he's going to want to take that up. I'm pretty sure he's going to rule with Daenerys. The both of them will sit the Iron Throne in the end if they survive, or I guess if the Iron Throne is destroyed, then maybe they will both sit the throne at Dragonstone. I think I've shared enough of my thoughts on Jon Snow and Daenerys and what will come after the battle for Winterfell if they both survive. You all let me know your thoughts on what will happen down below in the comment section. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is not as major as the last 2 events, but I've hinted at it twice already in this video. Arya side boob. Oh my, okay, let me sort of try to gather my thoughts for this video, but this was a little bit out of left field. Like, I enjoyed it, but it just kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, I've always said for the past 2 years, and pretty much since I started watching this show, that come the end of this, Arya is pretty much guaranteed to survive. She's one of George R. R. Martin's favorite characters, and the rumor is that if George were to kill her off, he'd have to sleep on the couch for a long time. So a lot of people think that Arya will be safe in the end. But holy crap, I've said for 2 years that Arya will not want to settle down at the end of this journey. She will likely go west to Westeros, and yes, she's going to run into Gendry again, but she won't be willing and open to have a relationship. And I also said in my last video that Gendry met with Arya and he's probably never going to tell her of his true lineage because he'll die before he gets the chance. That's not the case. Not only did Arya screw the brains out of Gendry, but now she could likely be pregnant with the next member of House Baratheon. Now, I will say compliments to Maisie Williams for doing that yoga. It really shows in this scene in a nice butt crack. When you really look at this scene as a whole, the implications kind of are not looking good for Gendry's favor. I feel like Arya starts out by questioning her, like, how many girls you slept with, dog? You kept it loyal to the game, you know what I mean? And it just feels like when something like this happens with a character, they've been gone for a while, they come back, they get an arc, we care about them. Not only that, but they share a key scene with one of everyone's favorite characters. They're on the top of the list to die. Now, it's interesting that Gendry is sort of trying to protect Arya and sending her below, like, shouldn't you go to the crypts? And she tosses a few freaking bullseyes, as she does multiple times in the episode. And really, the person who should be going down to the crypts here is Gendry. I really hope this bastard Baratheon blacksmith survives until the end. The next thing that I want to talk about is something that could have easily been missed just because the characters didn't acknowledge each other, but Ghost is back! We got to see Ghost in the first direwolf scene that we've had all season, and we haven't really seen much of him at all since season 6. Ghost is back and in action, and I must say that he is ready for war! Now, the moments that follow this scene are awesome. We get a reunion of Dolorous Ed, Samwell Tarly, and Jon Snow, the last few surviving members from the Night's Watch crew way back in the earlier on seasons, and they give a bit of a nod to each other. In my opinion, Sam and Jon will both survive, but I feel like Dolorous Ed could be one of the top candidates to die in this battle. Now, the scene that follows this of, the reunion between the Night's Watch members is pretty freaking hilarious. Most of the second-tier characters, aside from Jaime and Tyrion, are meeting in front of the fireplace in Winterfell, and they are all having a bit of a cute conversation. And then in walks Tormund with his giant freaking elk horn filled with what I assume would be ale. And then he starts telling the story of how he got the name of Giant's Bane. And then we all realize that Tormund be sucking on that giant titty milk. He's literally drinking a fucking flagon, or shit, I guess it's a horn filled with milk. And I feel like with Mac from It's Always Sunny being the dude who gets the arrow shot through his head in the last episode, this was taken from It's Also Sunny as well. The McPoyles love milk. And the fact that Tormund is drinking milk in a room full of people who are drinking booze makes me feel like this is something that's easily missed, and it's another shout out to It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, my favorite comedy show of all time. Damon, fighter of the night, man. Now, this part in the episode is where I feel like I said at the beginning of this video, is where we get like 1,000 years worth of meme material. There's so many awesome one-liners, but my favorite one, I think, of the whole show is when Tormund first comes in and he delivers the news that the dead are coming to Jon Snow, and Jon asks, when are they coming? And he says, in the morning, or before the sun comes up or something. And then right after that, he says, is the big woman still here? Like, oh my god, that's so hilarious. Like, his main focus is meeting Bran. And honestly, Gwendolyn Christie, can you freaking blame him? But speaking of Bran, she actually becomes a knight in this episode, and this was one of the scenes upon 5 others that I almost cried in. She's wanted to become a knight her entire life, and the fact that Jaime is the one that does it is just amazing. I sort of thought we'd be getting a hookup scene between the two of them, and at this point, after watching those scenes, I'm willing to pay money just so that the two of them can survive and have some sort of consummation at the end of this series. I mean, the fact that Jaime and Brienne have had such character arcs, and neither one of them, it seemingly, have yet to find happiness. I think they would find it in each other's arms, and I really want more touching moments between them before this series is over. Since we're getting kind of low on time for this video, I just want to reiterate, just in case anyone missed, what the plan of the good guys will be for the Battle of Winterfell. Now, they basically plan on fighting the dead and holding them off as long as possible until the Night King reveals himself. Once he reveals himself, I'm pretty sure Bran will likely be sitting out in the open next to a weirwood tree. Maybe Bran will try to signal to some crows, then the Night King will look through those crows' eyes or those ravens' eyes, see where Bran is, and try to swoop in and grab him. And once he does this, this is when, bam, Daenerys and Jon Snow plan on hopping out and attacking him directly. Now, I'm 100% positive that since Bran mentioned himself, he's being watched by the Night King. The Night King is aware of all this. He's likely going to wait until the very last moment. I have long since theorized that once the battle finally goes down, the Night King will realize that the best place for him to attack is actually in the crypts from underneath Winterfell. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen, but if it does, it will 100% catch the living off guard. Now, one thing we have to remind ourselves of before episode 3 starts, that no matter how much we think we've gotten figured out, nothing is confirmed until it airs on your television screens. This show is famous for subverting tropes and keeping everyone on the top of their tippy toes. And I wouldn't expect anything less for the greatest battle this show has ever done. Just as a bit of some side notes for this battle, it took 55 nights long to film. They wanted to make sure they got everything perfect, and this battle included thousands of extras. In my opinion, even if this battle turns out to be half as good as they said it would be, then we will likely be left all satisfied and smiling. Now, before we get out of here, I just want to quickly run through some of my favorite moments from the episode that I haven't yet mentioned. The first one would have to be Jaime and Tyrion finally getting to talk inside the walls of Winterfell. They're reminiscing, and they talk about the last time they were both there. Jaime was a golden lion, and Tyrion was a horn dog. Now, the thing is, they still are. They've just aged a little bit, and they don't wear their emotions on their sleeves as much, but I'm pretty sure given the first chance, Tyrion's gonna take a little trip to the Wintertown brothel, and if Jaime does survive this battle, I'm pretty sure when given the chance, he's gonna flee back to Cersei and try to convince her to lay down her arms and maybe do something so that the two of them can escape off into the sunset together. Characters progress to a certain point, but what makes this television so great is that it shows all of the flaws in human nature. Sometimes we relapse. Now, the foreshadowing to Jaime running back to Cersei was actually at the beginning of the episode when Jaime's being called out for all of his shit by Daenerys. She tells him this, and this, and he's like, yeah, and given the chance, I'd do it all again. We're at war. In my mind, and I could be wrong here, I felt that as soon as the war, being the living versus the dead, is over, Jaime's going to likely go back and join the Lannisters. If he's able to survive the events of the battle for Winterfell, then I don't really know if he'd want to stick around in a place where he's so unwanted. Brienne and Sansa did vouch for him, but once the boos are gone, the smoke clears, and there's no longer the threat of the dead, would Jaime Lannister receive such a warm welcome and acceptance? No, probably not. This is most likely, in my opinion, going to cause him to go and join back with Cersei Lannister. Another one of my favorite moments from the show is finding out that Pod learns how to fight. He's leading the training in the defenses of Winterfell, pretty much one-upping every person that comes in front of him. This is awesome. That means that Brienne's training has worn off on him, and Pod stands a decent chance of surviving the battle for Winterfell because of this. Then we have Arya's reunion with Beric and Sandor. It was pretty awesome. Everything that was said, I expected to be said, and I thoroughly enjoyed those moments. I feel like we haven't seen very much from Sandor this episode, or this season rather. I know there's only been 2 episodes of the season, but I think that's because in episodes 3, 4, 5, and 6, he's got a big plot coming up, and I think that may be something to do with Arya. They're going to reconnect, and it's likely going to be on a journey down to King's Landing. Another moment that I thoroughly enjoyed from the episode is from when Bran meets with Jaime. Now, it's interesting because I thought that interaction was going to go completely different, and then I had to remind myself that Bran is the three-eyed raven now. He's not who he used to be. He actually thanks Jaime, which is something that we all sort of thought thought about. Like, we hate on Jaime so much, but if he hadn't have pushed Bran out of the window, then Bran wouldn't be the three-eyed raven, and he wouldn't have been able to help Jon Snow and all of the good guys so much. So it's like we hate Jaime for nearly murdering a child, but we also have to thank Jaime because if he hadn't have done what he did, then Bran would never have become who he was. And for that, I have to give another big fat thank you to Dan and Dave and George R. R. Martins and every single person who's involved with this show. You guys made it so that we get all of these moments that we wanted to, and it's not taking away from the actual storyline. We wanted that acknowledgement of Bran talking to Jaime, finally hashing out things from the past, and the fact that the writers sort of just include this line of dialogue to let us know that yes, it was intentional and we have been planning this all the way from the start, it is amazing. It confirms just how genius this show truly is. And now that we're getting towards the end of the video and with war looming around the corner, if you all want, let me know down below in the comments section and I'll whip up a leaks video that will include all of the information I've been sent on the episode 3 battle for Winterfell. Not throwing up a spoiler warning here, I've been sent several leaks including a massive dragon battle scene between Daenerys and the Night King and another leak scene that involved Jaime and Arya and the direwolves. So if you all want that leaked air quotations video for episode 3, let me know down below in the comments section and I'll try to whip that up for you and have it posted by Wednesday. And just to sort of reiterate, this episode was amazing, and as of right now, it is my favorite episode ever of Game of Thrones. In 69 episodes, over 100 hours, this is my favorite. Everything that we've been looking forward to in the past several seasons and the 2-year wait all led up to this episode. This was so well written, so well acted. This episode got me so hype for episode 3 of Game of Thrones season 8. Not that I couldn't have already been more hyped to begin with, but a big props and a big thank you to every single person who has ever had anything to do with this show. Y'all rock and bravo. Alright, and with that being said, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 4,269. Also, make sure you're subscribed and then make sure every notification's turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Also, if you could please head over to Twitter and give me a follow at Sir_Hunts, and then head over to Instagram as well and give me a follow at Sir_Hunts_reviews. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. Super special shout out to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. And if anyone watching this video is interested in joining that, check out the link down below in the description or the link right up here. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name's Mark and this has been Sir Hunts Reviews. You know, I haven't really done one of these after the credits sort of thing here, but Sansa and Daenerys, thank you guys for making up. And I don't know if y'all can hear it, but I was just clapping at the same time. I really did enjoy that scene, and I forgot to mention in this video, but it shed some light on more of both of their characters. They're coming from different places, and this is that conversation that I had mentioned they needed to have after immediately watching episode 1. And I know the conversation ends with Sansa being concerned about the North, but after Daenerys found out the information about Jon, I'm pretty sure the North is going to be left alone. They all have bigger things to worry about. Dude. Okay, before we get started, headphone warning. If you're listening to this with headphones or earbuds, make sure you turn the volume down because I'm going to be extremely excited during this episode. Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 3 from top to bottom had me on the edge of my seat. I put a dent in my wall because at some moment during the episode, I got so lost in it, I just couldn't control my emotions. I'm certain that we could all agree the deaths in tonight's episode were tragic, but Arya killed the freaking Night King! Yeah, that's right. The army of the dead as of right now is no longer a threat, and all that's due to Arya freaking Stark. In this video, I'm going to discuss several things that you may or may not have missed, as well as some of my favorite moments from the episode. Here's your sign, and let's begin. Before we get started, please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 4,420. Also, make sure you're subscribed and then make sure every notification's turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Long night. Now, the first thing I'm gonna talk about in this video is pretty freaking obvious. Arya Stark killed the Night King. That still hasn't sank in. I watched the episode a second time and I've seen it for a few hours now, knowing with the fact that Arya killed the Night King, and I just can't wrap my brain around that. Something that's pretty easily missed about this whole scene is that when Arya is grabbed by the throat by the Night King, you know, we hear the ice crackling and she flips the dagger to her other hand. This was a move that she used on Brienne just last season when they were training in the courtyard. Now, when I was doing my live stream immediately after I saw it post-episode, it took me a while to remember where that was from, which if you want to, you can check out the link right up here and you can go and watch my live reaction to the episode. But just as the Night King walks in slow motion to Bran and is about to draw his magical ice sword that is apparently too cold for him to handle. But as soon as this happens, Arya comes leaping from behind him out of nowhere and then gets picked up by the neck, dropping the knife to her other hand, stabbing the Night King right seemingly where the dragon glass was placed in his chest. When you look at it from another angle, it kind of looks as though she stabs him in the opening in his armor, but I think the knife is long enough to actually touch the dragon glass, and the Valyrian steel in combination with the dragon glass shattering, I think is what ultimately kills the Night King. And now let me rephrase that real quick. We don't really know if he's 100% dead, but from what we saw in the episode, this was the end of the dead. The Night King and his army has been destroyed. From what we've been led to believe, the Night King cannot come back from being shattered. No White Walkers have been brought back from that. When I first watched the episode, I initially thought that maybe there was a chance that he warged into Bran. Bran wasn't under a warg for a really long time, and maybe once he saw Arya pop up out of nowhere, he knew he was going to die, so maybe he quickly transferred his essence into Bran. But that would feel like a bit of circular storytelling. From everything we know about the Army of the Dead and the White Walkers is there's no coming back once they get shattered and turn to ice. The Night King himself was created by the Children of the Forest. They're dead, so the magic that would bring him back no longer exists in the world, aside from whatever little magic may still be left inside of Bran. Now this next thing wasn't really easily missed, but I saw a bunch of people commenting about it during my live stream, so I'll go ahead and mention it now. Arya did not take the face of any White Walker or the Night King himself. The White Walker that turns his head a little bit realizes that something's off, and that's Arya flying through the air. And it's impossible for her to take the Night King's face because once she stabbed him in the gut, he shattered into ice. Now before we go any further into this video, I need to give some props to certain characters to which props are due. Now obviously my warrior queen sword swinging Daenerys, I will talk about you in a second, but first comes first, and that's Sansa Stark. Props to you. You are a controversial character in this fandom. I'm a big fan of yours, but tonight you really went to the top of my list. That little conversation that you had with Tyrion, those moments that y'all shared together were freaking perfect, and I do kind of think that maybe there's a small chance that Tyrion and Sansa will rekindle their marriage, but I'll talk about that in a second. The thing I want to give you props for is the moment when you said, let's stare the truth in the face. In this scene, Sansa realizes that she's not as powerful as she thinks she is. In these types of battle situations, she is utterly useless. The battle for Winterfell was no time to play games for the Iron Throne. There were no time to plot for the betterment of your house. Instead, she realizes that if she was not in that room, she would be dead. And this, I think, is what's going to give her the most respect going forward with Daenerys. One thing that's easily missed about this situation is that when she says if it wasn't for the Dragon Queen, then maybe we would still be together, and Missandei interjects if it wasn't for the Dragon Queen, then we'd all be dead. This is what I think ultimately makes Sansa realize that everyone has a role to play in this great game, and no matter if you think that someone may betray you at any second, you still have to have blind faith sometimes. Not only did she make it out of this battle relatively unscathed, but I think this scene is what's going to give her the most respect for Daenerys moving forward. Now, because it's sort of my job in these videos, let's look at that whole situation a little bit differently. When she has the conversation with Tyrion, we do have to remember that she did say if it wasn't for the Dragon Queen, yada yada yada. So maybe what Sansa's doing in sort of reconnecting with Tyrion is hoping that maybe she can form some sort of union or bond with Tyrion, so that way when the Great War's over and Cersei has been dealt with and Daenerys asks, or Sansa asks Daenerys one more time, what about the North? Maybe if Daenerys says something that Sansa doesn't like, she could have Tyrion speak to her a certain way. I mean, I guess I could just be overthinking it. You all let me know what you think about this situation and what exactly Sansa is doing down below in the comment section. Now, the next thing that I want to discuss that was, I guess, along the lines of easily missed wasn't something that was in the actual episode. I just want to state that this whole Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 3 took 55 nights to film, and that's just the battle sequences, not including the dialogue in between the characters. This episode was feature length, and many scenes that were shot for the battle that most people would have opted to do CGI, Game of Thrones actually went out and filmed it. What I'm getting at here is the budget for the episode was mostly spent on the massive dragon battle and then the huge hordes of whites that crawled all over Winterfell. If you remember when we saw a good shot of the dead at the beginning of Season 7, there were several giants in those shots, and we only saw one in tonight's episode. What I'm getting at here, along with the direwolf pack, is that the budget was spent. But not to worry, there's 3 more episodes remaining, and we do have the shot of the actual direwolf pack from the trailer. So for all of you that were asking about it, there's still a chance to see Nymeria in her super pack. Remember, she was a good part of the way down south when Arya ran into her, so there's a good chance that she'll maybe pop up in the battle for King's Landing. And now's as good a time as any to address this. For those of you that don't want to hear me rant, skip ahead about a minute, but for those of you that do, all of the people saying that this episode sucked and then it was just a drawn out battle that could have been taken taking place in 30 minutes and that yada yada and blah 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 blah. Suck it. This episode was literally, and I know I just said this about the last one, but it was the greatest of anything ever. You don't understand what it takes to make something as great as this. So until you get a bit more qualified and maybe learn what it actually takes to make great television, and then you can talk about it. I mean, the few people that I have seen talking smack about the episode seemingly are just upset because their predictions didn't come true. This episode was wildly unpredictable, and I do agree with a little bit of the sentiment that maybe the Night King dying that way was a bit anticlimactic, but they've been telling us that since the start of this season, or really since the beginning of this series. The Night King is a physical embodiment of death. He does have a bit of a backstory that he's a human, and we learned that all the way back in season 6. And now that I've seen it go down the way it has on screen, that was perfect. The amount of mystery that came with him kept us all the way up until the moment that it happened, not knowing how to defeat this guy. We thought that Winterfell was going to be overwhelmed. Literally every single character that was taking place in the battle, there were several scenes where we thought they were going to die. And yes, they did it multiple times throughout the episodes, but that's how good the writing and the acting was. We didn't care. We still thought that even though we just saw them narrowly escape death 6 seconds prior, they could still die in that moment. That's how you know that the writing for this was superb. And to be honest, when I first heard Dan and Dave telling us over and over again that the Night King is just death and there's not really anything special to him, I thought that sounded like a bit of a letdown. But now that I've seen it play out on screen, it's perfect. I mean, we gotta realize no one saw Arya killing the Night King. So if the Night King does come back and maybe there is something a little bit more to his story, then it would be definitely a complete shock now because we all thought his ass was dead. I'm not saying they're gonna do that, but if this is the way that they wrap up and this was the last time we see the Night King or the threat of the dead, I am completely satisfied with that. This story has always been about the human, more present, in-your-face evil. The Night King was used as a plot device to bring all those people who were warring for seasons together, set aside their differences, or die. And I think this major battle that both Daenerys and Jon Snow just barely survived is gonna make that who's gonna sit the Iron Throne a bit meaningless. From the preview that we see for episode 3, Daenerys saying that now we're entering this final war, in the scene where she's in the Winterfell Great Hall and all the survivors are sort of clamoring and cheering at what she just said, I'm pretty positive that Jon Snow was like, hey babe, you can have it. He's never wanted the Iron Throne before, and the fact that he just found out he's the heir, I don't think would make him want it. I mean, it would just seem extremely out of the blue. I guess he could use it as more so of a bargaining chip, saying that, look Daenerys, you can have the Iron Throne, we can be together, I don't want to sit the Iron Throne, but just leave the North as an independent kingdom. Make it so that they'll never have what happened to my house happen again. House Stark was ripped apart from the inside out, and now Winterfell is utterly destroyed. I think if Sansa can just be guaranteed a bit of safety in saying that the North stay out of the South's affairs and the South stay out of the North's affairs, then everyone would get along a lot better. And like I mentioned earlier, I think that's sort of what Sansa's doing when she talks to Tyrion. And also, one more thing about episode 3, I do plan on breaking down that preview and then maybe throwing in a couple leaks for a video that will be dropping between Monday and Tuesday, but there appears to be a time jump. So I think episode 4 is mainly going to be rebuilding Winterfell, because it clearly has been rebuilt in this image here, but also Daenerys needs time to rally all her troops together, let her dragons heal, and then go set out to take Cersei. Traditionally, the second to last episode of a Game of Thrones season, in this case it would be episode 5, usually has the most bloodshed and chaos. I would not be surprised at all if episode 4 ends with a cliffhanger, and that being Daenerys showing up on the shores of King's Landing with her army and dragons. Now the next thing that I want to discuss has to do with Melisandre. Now, she kind of arrived a bit more empty-handed than I initially thought she was. We knew she was going over to Essos, and I thought she might have been going over there to potentially pick up the fiery hand. Well, clearly, they never made it present, so she might have gone over there to maybe refill her potions. You know, she did mention way back in the earlier seasons to Selyse, who is Stannis Baratheon's wife, that she has potions that can make fire shoot up 15 feet in the air. So I'm not wondering if she didn't use those same similar potions on the Dothraki swords. What has me interested, though, is something that you might have missed, is that when she leans down to light the trenches, you'll notice that it doesn't work until she nearly has a tear fall from her eyes. She begins praying, saying that prayer over and over again, and then she stops, sort of loses faith, and then when she realizes if she doesn't do anything right now, this is all will have been for nothing, that's when it works. So the way that R'hllor works in the books and the TV show, or the way that his magic prevails, is once his subjects lose faith. The first time Thoros brought back Beric Dondarrion was after Thoros had lost faith in R'hllor, and then when Melisandre brought back Jon Snow, Jon didn't come back until everyone had sort of lost faith and left the room. Now we have to give a lot of props to Melisandre and her character. She not only brought back Jon Snow to life, but she also gave Arya the courage to go and kill the Night King. I definitely don't agree with her choice to kill Shireen or send a Shadow Baby to go and kill Renly, but like Bran tells the to Theon, which is interesting because that was all the way back in the season 8 trailer. We were all trying to figure out who Bran tells this conversation to, which was everything that you've done has led you here. He says it to Theon, but this is true to literally every single character. If Melisandre hadn't done what she did, then she wouldn't be in the situation to sort of resurrect Jon and help save the North from the undead. Now, one thing that's somewhat easily missed about that whole interaction is that when Arya and Melisandre first start interacting with each other, Melisandre tells Arya blue eyes, brown eyes, and green eyes. Now, Melisandre has killed a few characters with green and blue eyes. One person she hasn't killed yet, though, is someone with brown eyes. And a lot of people think that at some point during the season, especially in one of these last 3 episodes, Arya will be taking a trip down south to go and kill the last person on her list, that being Cersei. There's also someone in King's Landing that Sandor wants to kill. So the theory states that Arya and Sandor will go to King's Landing and kill Cersei in the mountain. A lot of us think there's a possibility that Sandor could be gravely wounded in this fight with the mountain, and Arya will finally put him to rest and sort of coming full circle to back when she left him to die back in season 4. Now, Sandor was on Arya's list for a while. He does have brown eyes, and if she were to sort of do it as a mercy killing, well, then everything would just come full circle and end really poetically. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is, just for clarity's sake, just in case anyone missed it, the people we lost in this episode: Lyanna Mormont, Dolorous Edd, Beric Dondarrion, Theon Greyjoy, the freaking Night King, Jorah Mormont, and Melisandre, the Red Priestess. And with Melisandre and Thoros dying 2 seasons apart, anyone else who dies the rest of the season, Jon or Daenerys included, they could actually stay dead this time. We haven't really heard anything from Kinvara, and the Red Priest and Priestesses are the only ones who we know that can bring back someone we lost. And according to Melisandre, anyone who R'hllor brings back has a purpose to fill. So that makes me wonder, why did he bring back Jon Snow? Did he bring back Jon solely for the purpose of sitting the Iron Throne? Surely it wasn't to defeat Cersei or to ride a dragon. And to be honest, thinking about that sort of makes me worried about the fate of Daenerys in the end. Now, one of the deaths aside from Jorah's that I think is the most tragic was the other member of House Mormont. Now, Lyanna, had she listened to Jorah, she might have actually survived this thing. And at the beginning of the season, when she pulled a Sansa and interrupted Jon from talking and sort of called out Daenerys, I kind of was like, hey, can you just sit down somewhere? You brought in like literally 56 soldiers, and in my opinion, you're really overstepping your boundary a little bit there, little one. But that aside, when she got swatted out of the way by the giant, I had to pause the episode and go back and rewatch it. I wasn't sure that was her. I can't believe they're just that careless with life on this show. I mean, I've watched it enough to know that that's the type of thing that made this show famous, but I couldn't believe they killed Lyanna Mormont. Out of all the people that I was expecting to die in this episode, she was literally at the bottom of the list. With her being gone and then Jorah being killed at the end of the episode, I wonder what's going to happen with the future of House Mormont. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about in this video is something that I've been putting off since the very beginning. Daenerys picks up a freaking sword and starts killing whites. It's really no questions asked. We've never seen her do anything like this before, and she immediately notices that there is a dragonglass blade on the ground and picks it up and starts defending herself. This is what you want to see in a ruler. Someone who's not afraid to get their hands dirty. Someone who not only rides dragons, frees slaves, unites kingdoms, but also can whoop a few white asses up when necessary. And one thing that was easily missed about this whole situation, and I'm gonna tell you right now, I could be reading too much into it, but the fact that when Daenerys fell from her dragon, there was a bit of like small hesitation from the camera panning out to her. We think she's pregnant, and if her falling in season 1 and then that causing an early pregnancy is any indication or foreshadowing rather to this next season, Daenerys maybe had lost the baby in those moments. I doubt it. I mean, I don't even know if she's pregnant. Like I said, I could just be reading a little bit too much into this situation, but her attitude in the episode 4 preview is all straight to business. So if she is pregnant, now's the chance to sort of bring that up. Maybe that's what ultimately brings her and Jon closer when they discuss who will sit the Iron Throne. A child pretty much changes any and everything, and also raises the stakes tenfold into these last few episodes. Now, we're getting really close for time in this video, and anything that you think I haven't mentioned so far, because I'm going to close this out with the rant and one more thing that I enjoyed from the episode, I probably discussed it in my live breakdown, and like I said before, that's linked down below in the description. Now, the last thing that I want to discuss that I enjoyed from Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 3, well, the last thing that I want to discuss in this video anyway, is the intensity that is Brienne and Jaime. They got outnumbered, pushed down, and overcome so many times this episode. I gotta give props to Gwendolyn Christie and Nikolaj Coster-Waldau. The two of you are some of the greatest actors on the show, and I don't know if you all watching or listening remember a few weeks ago when we're coming up, when we're discussing episode 3, I mentioned that Jaime or Brienne could die, and I was wrong. Both of them survived this episode at least, but that leaves my my, my ultimate hopes for them still on the table. And that is that they survive and pursue some sort of relationship with each other. The two of them have had such a crazy arc and they've been through some of the worst shit on the show. They deserve to be with each other in the end. If there's one couple that I ship the most aside from Jon and Daenerys, that's gonna be Bran and Jaime. I really hope they get a happy ending, even though I know this is not that type of show. And now comes on the rant. Now, I tried not to include too much of it into that video, and I gave you guys a bit of a teaser at the beginning. I saw people complaining in my comment section when I was doing the live stream that they had a lot of issue with the way the Night King was just wrapped up and that he's seemingly dead and that there wasn't more to his backstory. Here's the thing. The show has done human evil so often, they've never done something that is just pure evil, that just represents death. And if you don't like the way that turned out on the television show, well then you always have the novels. When George R. R. Martin finally puts out Winds of Winter and we get A Dreamless Spring, then you'll get everything you ever wanted for, just like we got from the books in the first place. The TV show has to be wrapped up narratively. If you guys want all of this explanation for all of these characters, well then we'd get like 34 episodes. And as great as that would be, that's just not practical. These shows take literally $20 to $30 million per episode to film. And when something drags on that long, it loses how precious it is to us. If we did get 34 more episodes of Game of Thrones, or if they did do everything we wanted them to, then I guarantee you people would still find stuff to complain about. It's impossible to make everyone happy. And to be honest, for all the people who are complaining about little stuff like the Winterfell being blocked off, so it doesn't really make sense how Arya could have snuck out of nowhere, or how did this person get there so quick, my whole thing to that is, are you an idiot? There's literally dragons breathing fire flying around in the sky alongside a guy who raises the dead. You're asking questions about the accuracy of where a character comes from when there's dragons flying around. Are you serious? And another thing I saw people complaining about is the fact that they didn't, pay much homage to the prophecies and Daenerys' visions and Bran's visions. And my whole thing to that is, well, you need to reread A Song of Ice and Fire. George R. R. Martin has stated several times that prophecy in his world are meaningless. Just because it's been written in a way and such you can see a character doing a certain thing and they have to fulfill this prophecy, well, George keeps it real, how the real world is anyway, and kills that character before they can ever complete anything. Need I remind you that as of right now, Jon Snow is still dead in the books, and there's actually like a 50% chance that he doesn't come back. Just because you think we're guaranteed something is meaningless with this show. That's what makes it so great. It keeps everyone on the top of their toes. And while I would have liked for the Night King to have a bit more of a backstory, the way that they decided to do it for the television show works perfectly. I feel like the conclusion of the Night King, if this really is the end of him, and like I said, there's a strong chance that it isn't because the way that it was ended, we may find him show up on the back of his dragon in King's Landing or something crazy, but the way that the Night King ended, if like I said, this was the way that they deal with him, will always be controversial for the television show. Something more expansive and more extensive into his backstory will exist in the novels. This is likely one of those plot lines that we'll have to watch all the way throughout the season, and then once the show is finally done, we can go back and watch it from beginning to the end, and the way that the Night King is actually dealt with will probably make a lot more sense. And I will say that as long as this was and as intense as this was, I really do appreciate episode 2 even more. That was the perfect calm before the storm. We got a lot of reconnection, that human emotion that makes this show great. We also got a lot of jokes, all before this. In my opinion, that was perfect. Alright, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. And like I stated a little while ago, if there's anything that you think I missed talking about in this video, go check down below and go and watch my live stream, and I probably discussed it in this video. But I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 4,420. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then make sure every notification's turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Super special shout out to every single person watching, and a super special thank you to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunt's Reviews. Headphone warning: if you're listening to this video using earbuds or anything of the sort, you might want to turn the volume down just a wee bit, as I may blow out your eardrums with some of my excitement from having witnessed episode 4. The Kraken has destroyed a dragon, and with that is growing to the top of my shit list. In this video, I want to discuss several things you may or may not have missed from Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 4, as well as some upcoming events that may have been foreshadowed. This video will contain spoilers, so as always, here's your sign and let's begin. Before we get started, please slap a like on this video, as a like goal is going to be 4,420. Also, we have a subscriber goal of trying to reach 100,000, so please make sure you're subscribed and then turn your notifications on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Long night. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, the first thing I want to talk about is how Euron is now at the top of my poo-poo list, and I hope Daenerys and Drogon really go full throttle on that ass. I mean, usually in these videos, I try to stay pretty impartial, and I like to put myself in that character's shoes and look at it from their angle and then provide you guys with what they may be thinking is motivating them in those moments. This time, I'm not going to do that. Euron, you are a dickhead, bro. Like, I don't know what it was, but I'm pretty sure he was flirting with Daenerys back in Game of Thrones Season 7 in the Dragon Pit. And then, you know, he sleeps with Cersei one time and he's just completely turned tail on that motivation. I feel like if this were a little bit more true to Euron's book counterpart, he might have tried to play his hand even wider. Manipulation is his game in the novels, and it sort of seems like his show counterpart is just going to play the love-smitten fool. I'm positive that the first chance Cersei gets, especially with Jaime coming back into play, she's going to throw Euron out to sea. But one thing you may have noticed in the moments where the dragon dies is that it's sort of poetic that Rhaegal bites the dust over the ocean. This is symbolic of Euron being a House Greyjoy and being a kraken. It's almost as if he grabbed the dragon from the sky with his tentacles and pulled him down to the depths of the ocean. It may suck that Euron killed the dragon before, but we can't really say we've seen this coming when I guess you could call it foreshadowing. Viserion died the same way, but falling into a lake. I think that's a way to sort of deal with the corpse of the dragon and not have to worry about CGI rendering it in later into the episode because it's now at the bottom of the ocean. The next thing that I want to discuss in this video is something that really sort of hit home with me, and I hope the way that this episode was sort of played out, it doesn't turn out that way. I know they're going to write it well, and I know it'll still be just as gripping as every other episode, but I really hope that Daenerys isn't becoming the Mad Queen. Now, initially I said this in my live stream, speaking of which, you can check out the link right up here or the link down below in the description and go and check that out for yourself, but I initially thought that Varys was acting out of place. He was just threatened by Daenerys. She told him in season 7 that the very first time that he messed up, she would burn him. Now that I've had some time to think about it, I've realized that the only reason why Varys is acting so courageous and ballsy, if you will, is because there's no longer a threat of the Red Priestess around him. He knows that Melisandre, I'm sure, walked off into the sunset and dissipated, and we haven't heard anything from Kinvara just yet. There's still a possibility that she could pop up with maybe Daario in these next 2 episodes, but Varys is a spider, and he's even more dangerous because he's pretending that everything he's doing is for the betterment of the realm. And I guess if you look at it from his point of view, it sort of is, but he really does sway in the wind. This is what Tyrion was sort of calling him out on. By asking him how many rulers he served on, he's sort of saying, like, maybe you should just wait before you jump ship. Daenerys is a good person. We trusted in her for a reason. Let's allow her to make the proper decision. But I guess what I'm sort of getting at here is no matter which way the plot seems to be going, we have to remember this show is famous for twisting that around and turning it on a hair. With these longer episodes, the storyline could start out one way and then completely turn another. And speaking of longer episodes, I just want to ask you all watching this video for a second. Do y'all feel that maybe these episodes are a little bit too long? Not in a bad way, but in a good way, in the sense that we're on the edge of our seat for so freaking long, we just want it to end. It's so agonizing to be that immersed in suspense for such a long period of time. Usually the first thing I do after the episode is go back and rewatch any of the nude scenes there might have been, but this time I actually had to step outside and grab a quick smoke. Just sort of getting back on track here, I feel like Daenerys, in the moments where everyone's sort of relving in, or that's not really a word, but everyone's sort of just basking in how awesome Jon is, and Tormund, the wine monger, is spreading all of these awesome war stories, it starts to go in slow motion and Daenerys sort of feels left out. And instead of trying to include herself further into one of these scenes and enjoying herself with the rest of the people, she realizes that she's lost so much, she doesn't really feel as though she belongs. Sometimes you go through so much and you're in such a depression, you feel as though you want to remove yourself from everyone else because you can't really relate to them. You don't want to impede on your happiness, so you feel as though the best thing to do in that situation is just walk away. But in this scene with Daenerys, where everything just sort of becomes heavy, in my opinion, I recognized it as one thing: a panic attack. The moment where she realizes that everything just sort of hits her all at once. She's lost a dragon, she's lost her entire army, she's been raised her entire life expecting that she would be sold off to someone in order for her brother to acquire an army and they would go back and take the Iron Throne. She's had this in her mind her entire life, and if you remember in Game of Thrones Season 1, she mentions how she doesn't want any of this. Right before Viserys sends her off to go and get raped by Khal Drogo, she tells him that she doesn't want to do this. She doesn't want this. This is something that's been forced upon her. So now, fast forward 7 whole seasons, she's acquired so much, all while having that someone else's ideal and goals in the back of her mind. She gets so close to conquering it, and then it's all knocked back down. Every single time she has a success, she's knocked back down 2 steps. Now, I don't care who you are and how strong of a person you think you may be, but if you went through the same she did, then your reaction would be pretty similar to hers. It would be jealousy, confusion, and you don't really know what to do aside from just walking away. Now, the last thing I want to mention about this whole Daenerys, Varys, Tyrion, the Seven Kingdoms, Jon Snow mess before I move on to other stuff that happened in this episode is that Daenerys is a complex being. We all seem to think she's going to go Mad Queen at least once every season, and then she turns tail and we all realize that, hey, she has some common sense. The people that she's chosen to surround herself with usually win if Daenerys tries to act on her impulses, but we have to remember one thing, or 2 things rather. She watched her dragon die in front of her for the 2nd time, and then also Cersei, who just had someone kill her dragon, had her right hand beheaded and then pushed off a building. Whatever Daenerys' next course of action will take, then so be it. Fire and blood, motherfuckers. Everyone is quick to jump on a character bandwagon hating train, but we have to realize that plot lines will switch up at the turn of a corner, and we already have a Mad Queen on this show. That's Cersei. She's the one who killed hundreds because of one that she placed in power. And you know what? I'm gonna take this one step further. Debate me down in the comments section, but this whole sort of thing has all been Cersei's fault. If she never suggested to Jaime to push the little kid out of the window, and she could have kept Jaime's willy out of her for JJ until they got back to King's Landing, Cersei, I got one word for you. Well, 2. Fire and blood. Now, the next thing that I want to discuss is Jaime and his progression, or regression. I guess something that was easily missed is that Jaime does this all the time. Every time we start to make some sort of leeway with his character and we get a breakthrough with him doing the right thing, of his mind winning over what he feels is better, he gets caught up in Cersei's slippery lies in a web of mess and just keeps getting pulled back in. And the part that was easily missed is the conversation that he has with Brienne. He does not mean those words that he says to her right before he walks away. This is a callback from Game of Thrones season 6 when Jaime is laying siege to River Run. And if we want to take this a step further in the books, while Jaime's in the Riverlands, the timeline's really construed here, but basically Jaime gets a letter, he reads the letter, it's Cersei asking for help, and then he tosses the letter in the fire. In those moments he realizes that him and Cersei were brought into this world together, and perhaps they deserve to die together. And in these moments in Game of Thrones season 8 episode 4, this is what he's telling Brienne that he realizes. He doesn't mean deep down that he's a terrible person. You know, everyone does wrong, but everyone should be given a chance to redeem themselves. Or at least this is what Brienne is trying to explain to Jaime, but in Jaime's mind, he deserves death for what he has done, and that's likely what he's going to go do. Now, I don't think Jaime's going to go stand by Cersei's side and then completely regress back to all the progress that he made and try, even though he knows she's evil, go fight by her side. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people, and his actual plan is to go and kill Cersei. He knows that he's one of the only people that can get close enough to do so, and he's hoping that he will die in the process in order for him to not have to live with the guilt. I'm thinking he may meet up with Arya along the way, and she should be able to help him with his journey. Not so much on the TV show, but in the books, the Valonqar prophecy is something that is very real, and it states that Cersei will be killed by her younger brother. We know that Cersei is minutes older than Jaime, so maybe this series ends, or Cersei's death anyway, is at the hands of Jaime and him strangling her, which is pretty much what the Valonqar prophecy states. And you know what, just going on a crazy side tangent here, it's also possible for Euron to fulfill the Valonqar prophecy. He is a younger brother of Balon Greyjoy, and after he finds out that Cersei's not really his baby mama, then I'm pretty sure he's gonna go and attempt to wipe her off the map. Cersei has caused more pain and turmoil than any other villain in Game of Thrones and has affected pretty much every single character that's still alive. The fact that she just killed 2 of Daenerys' closest advisors, I'm pretty sure whichever way she goes out is gonna involve not only Daenerys forcing her into a corner, but also dying in some horribly horrific way, likely by someone close to her like Jaime, just so she's in that much more pain as she spends her last few moments in Westeros. Now, the next thing that I want to discuss is something that was a bit of a gripe that I had with the episode. Jon, will you just pet the damn dog? Like, literally, walk over to him and say goodbye. I think what these moments, and this is probably just me reading too much into it, and this could be something that everyone missed, is the fact that Jon doesn't go say goodbye to his direwolf is sort of the way that he turns his back on House Stark. He doesn't actually say goodbye, but I feel like the fact that he's leaving for King's Landing, he won't be returning until he is either dead or the actual king. Sam has said it the most before. When Jon Snow leaves, he always comes back, and the way that he never actually says goodbye to Ghost is the same way that he's felt while living in Winterfell under House Stark. He's never sort of felt like one of them. And somehow, Jon knew deep down that his destiny lies elsewhere, not in the cold, frostbitten halls of Winterfell. You know, on a bit of a side note here, it's kind of ironic that everyone keeps saying that because Jon doesn't want the Iron Throne, that will make him a better king. And then Daenerys mentions when she's having that heart-to-heart with Jon that the way that the people look at him is not the same way that people look at her across the sea. Sort of makes you think that maybe Daenerys will give the crown to Jon Snow. Instead of him giving it to her, maybe she will willingly leave. Well, never mind, that would be dumb. But maybe her multiple kamikaze moments throughout the entirety of this show has been foreshadowing to how she ultimately goes out. I think in the moments where Daenerys sort of does that dive towards Euron, she's willing to accept death if it means death for Euron as well. And just sort of touching at what I was getting at in the live stream, they're sort of writing Daenerys into a corner, and the only way out is death. The only way I could see her not sitting the Iron Throne is death. Or at least that's the way, or what we're being led to believe. Maybe in the next episode, in the few clips that we get to see of Tyrion in the trailer, he'll finally be able to convince Daenerys. Marriage. Just marry Jon Snow. Both of you can sit the Iron Throne. He doesn't really want it, so he could be like the political figurehead in charge that the crowds just sort of woon over, and you're the brains behind the whole operation, making sure the Seven Kingdoms prosper. That is all, after all, what Daenerys has wanted. Now, another moment that I thoroughly enjoyed was like sort of like a silent air horn moment was when Arya was joined Sandor on his quest to King's Landing. We pretty much got Clegane Bowl confirmed, and I'm positive that between the two of them, they will either be able to take out at least one of their targets, whether that's the Mountain or Cersei. Now we have to realize that Sandor's got a bit of a competition for who wants to kill the Mountain, because as of right now, Grey Worm just saw his one and only true love being beheaded. And you know, now that I'm thinking about it and starting to realize, literally everyone who we care about is headed to King's Landing. And with this being the second to last episode of not only this season but of the series, you best believe there will be an insane amount of death. I'm gonna go ahead and call it right now. I predict that Cersei will be dead by the end of episode 5. You all let me know what you think down below in the comment section. Hey, you know what? Just because I can do this and this is my channel, I'm also gonna make another prediction that if Cersei survives by the end of episode 5, then that will mean that Daenerys will have died. The Mad Queen versus the Dragon Queen. Both of them arguably have nothing to lose. Now, throwing up just a super quick spoiler warning before I discuss this next part. Skip ahead a few seconds if you don't want to hear about it. But we were given images, and I mentioned them in almost every video that I've made this season, that included Jon Snow meeting with Cersei at some point. Well, now this pretty much confirms to happen in episode 5, and I feel like the whole plot that's going on has been confirmed. It's something that I've suggested at it before. Cersei will find about Jon Snow's true lineage. She will then confer with Qyburn, and he will likely suggest to her that making an alliance with Jon Snow, who is proven to be the true heir of the Seven Kingdoms, would likely be a better fit than Euron, who's a pirate and way less trustworthy than Jon Snow. And what's likely going to happen is Jon will meet with Cersei, and Cersei will agree to it after finding out about Jon Snow's true lineage. Jon will likely be hoping to stop any potential bloodshed that is about to happen. And we actually get a glimpse of this in that episode 5 promo teaser. Now, whatever is said between these two characters, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a monologue that will go down in the history books. Jon Snow and Cersei have never really shared a scene together as far as them being the only two in it, and I'm pretty sure whatever Cersei tells Jon is going to be full of lies and manipulation. And what Jon said in this last episode, Daenerys is his queen. He's not going to be hearing none of that. This would likely cause Cersei to react poorly. And there was a long running theory that when Jon Snow meets with Cersei, she has him kidnapped. So maybe she seizes Jon in these moments, and the fact that Tyrion was the one that convinced Jon to go and meet with Cersei, maybe this is looked upon as a betrayal. Tyrion would then be blamed for mistrusting Cersei yet again, and this would likely be the cause of his trial. Although I could just be overthinking it. You know, Cersei could be the one who calls this meeting. Maybe it's because she realizes that she's going to need someone to still control the North, and if she does make some sort of alliance with Jon Snow, he's way more trustworthy than Daenerys. I feel like Cersei kidnapping someone and taking them hostage yet again would be a bit of a wait, that's this show. Running themes. History repeats itself. Maybe she is going to get one more captive before the show's out. And the last couple things I want to talk about in this video are just some of the moments that I enjoyed or you know, that were just extremely hard for me to watch. Missandei's death. Now, like I mentioned in my live stream, sometimes the side characters' deaths are the ones that really get you off guard. I spent my 2 years that Game of Thrones Season 8 was being filmed preparing myself for the death death of main characters. Now, I know if Daenerys or Jon Snow or Sansa or Arya or Tyrion or any of them really bite the dust, I would have prepared myself for that. The fact that I was not expecting in any sort of way for Missandei to die made her death affect me so much more. I appreciate the fact that the showrunners decided to sort of blur her death out. It would have just been too emotional to have watched after we just saw Rhaegal die. Then we got to see Missandei, who's been with the show since season 2. You are a long-running character, and I really enjoy Natalie Emmanuel's work on Game of Thrones. But I will say next time, if that opportunity ever arises, grab Cersei and take her down with you. Another thing I thoroughly enjoyed about this episode was the dialogue. I know some people didn't enjoy that as much, but the scenes with Varys and Tyrion especially were very reminiscent from the earlier scenes. The fact that they were plotting in front of the Dragonstone throne is something that's easily missed, that they used to do this a lot back in Game of Thrones season 2. Character expansion is great, and the fact that they have two characters share such a long scene is the show's way of conveying what those characters' innermost thoughts are. In the books, we have the luxury of just straight up turning the page and then reading exactly what's going on in that character's head, and it's always creative to see the way that the show is going to convey that dialogue. I appreciate those kinds of scenes very much, and I love the callbacks to the earlier seasons. It reminds you that this show is, after all, the Game of Thrones. Games are not always played with swords, but sometimes with words. The last thing that I want to mention in this video is, real quickly, Gendry finally getting the title he deserves. He is now Lord of Storms, and in the very first thing he does, after sleeping with Arya and finding out this information, is proposing to her. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I really do hope that after Arya takes care of Cersei, or once her final mission is completed, she does go and join him and make their father's dream come to fruition. Also, shout out to Lynn Shaw for calling this way back like 6 months ago. And on a side note, do y'all think it's possible that maybe Jon Snow and Daenerys are just so done with the games for the Iron Throne by the end of this, when it's all said and done in 2 more episodes, that they just decide to hand the crown to the next person that would technically be in line, I guess, aside from them, Gendry? With that super tinfoil idea being said, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. Alright, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could, please slap a like on this video. The like goal is going to be 4,420. Hey, you know what? You guys keep smashing those like goals. Let's make the like goal something crazy like 20,000 likes. Also, we have a subscriber goal of trying to reach 100,000 strong by the end of Game of Thrones Season 8. Please make sure you're subscribed and then turn your notifications on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Long night. Super special shout out to every single person watching, and a super special thank you to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunt's Reviews. Headphone warning, in this video, like usual, my vocal range will be going up, and I may hurt your ears unless you adjust the volume a little bit. After my second viewing of Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 5, I've now come to realize that this was also one of the greatest episodes of this entire series. Now, don't get me wrong, I had some major gripes with this episode, and I will discuss them in this video, but overall, I think that's probably just because so much shit that I didn't want to happen actually happened and went down in this episode, and I'm still dealing with that as we speak. In this video, I want to discuss some things that you may or may not have missed from Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 5, and what exactly I think will go down in the final episode of Game of Thrones. Now, as always, this video will contain spoilers, so here's your sign, and let's begin. Now, before we get started, please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 20,420. Also, make sure you're subscribed. We are so close to hitting 100,000. And also, make sure you turn the notifications on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video throughout this upcoming long night. Now, the first thing that I want to discuss is something that I need to get off my chest, and it's a little bit of my gripe with the episode. Sometimes, as a fan, you think you want to see something happen so bad, you would trade off seeing other plot points and characters that you think aren't as important. And what I'm talking about specifically in this episode is Clegane Bowl. That is something that has been that is something that has been wanted for so long by this fandom. That's really all you hear about when you think of endgame for Game of Thrones. You think of Sandor, who's a lot of people's favorite character, and then you also go Clegane Bowl. It's become a meme at this point, and it's one of those things like with last season where we knew Gendry was coming back. We were like, we hope someone addresses the fact that he might have still been rowing, and sure enough, Davos actually does this. And the line, while funny, does come off as a bit of removal. It takes me out of the show a little bit. And that's exactly what happened with Clegane Bowl. The whole like staging of the event of the half-broken Red Keep, and then smoke rising, and then fire all around them, which clearly, you know, this is signifying that Sandor has finally gotten over his fear for the most part of fire. But then just the whole staging of the event. I mean, when Sandor first came back, remember, he was gone for the entirety of season 5. When we came back in season 6, he came back as a broken individual, someone who was no longer who they formerly was. The revenge-driven, chicken-eating sycophant was dead. Sandor was no longer the Hound. He had become this new person with a purpose. He actually somewhat found faith, and he was on this mission to help rid the realm of this threat of the undead, which was a big deal for his character, because not only was he giving up his sort of retirement plan that he had going on, remember they were going to build a temple, even though all of those villagers died, he still could have somewhat have lived a mellow, solemn life in the Riverlands. The fact that he decided to go with Beric and Thoros shows the viewer that Sandor has come on this immaculate journey, and he's gone through so many twists and turns, and now he's finally on a path that will lead him to ultimate redemption. But then, after the Night King is killed, then he no longer has a purpose. He resorts back to his old ways. And I guess this whole rant was pointless, because now I'm starting to realize why they wrote it the way they did. Humans are imperfect, and we are creatures of habit. Sometimes we resort to the only thing we know, and for Sandor, that's revenge. I don't know. You all let me know what you think down below in the comment section. I will say, like I mentioned in my live stream, speaking of which, you can go watch that in this link right up here, the link down below in the description, but I thoroughly enjoyed the choreography. The way that the scene went down with the actors, that was fucking awesome. I really enjoyed, or I guess enjoy wouldn't be the best word, but it was pretty gruesome watching the two of them fight on screen, and I did enjoy watching that a lot. One thing you may or may not have missed is that actually when the Mountain slams his brother Sandor up against the wall and then starts pressing into his eye sockets, this is actually a callback to season 4 when the Mountain was fighting Oberyn. The poison on Oberyn's weapons are the reason why the Mountain is in his current condition. Now, the next thing that we need to address is something that really weighs heavy on my heart, and I know I get super excited and over-exaggerate sometimes in these videos, but it really is the truth. I love Daenerys. And I said repeatedly, not only in my videos, but also just in my head, no matter what happens in Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 5, I'm going to see it from her side. I was expecting, which was in fact a rookie mistake, but I was expecting to stand by my queen no matter what. Obviously, innocents were going to be lost, but I just really didn't have any idea how much innocence. And like I said in my live stream, at the beginning of Daenerys' slaughter, literally the first 25 minutes of the episode, I was rooting. I was screaming fire and blood at the screen. I was like, dude, I don't feel anything for you Lannister fucks right now. You guys shouldn't have pissed off the Dragon Queen. And yes, we're seeing a lot of loss and a lot of death on screen, but we've already seen that. On Daenerys' side, she's lost everything in such a short period of time, and she hasn't really had time to emotionally reel. This was my expectation, and it was subverted. I can't believe I fell into the trap of what this show is famous for. No matter what you expect, it ain't gonna happen. You know how usually everybody's really excited to watch next week's episode of Game of Thrones? I honestly cannot say that. Now, obviously, I'm excited to finally see how this long journey ends, but I wish we had a break. I wish we had a week off to just deal with everything and be able to process this properly. And I always have to remind myself that this is a make-believe world. No matter what, if these characters die on the show, well, the actors are still alive, so there's always that. But it just really bugs me. I mean, I guess I always thought that this show would end in a way that would be dramatic and insane, and we're going to lose so much. But the one character that I enjoy the most, and the main reason why I fell in love with this show, would be okay. Not only would she survive, but she would also be seen in such a way and portrayed in such a way that she's the queen, the freer of slaves, the breaker of chains, not the murderer of innocents. Doesn't quite have the same ring as Khaleesi. What Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen did in episode 5 is really unforgivable, at least in Jon's eyes. And one thing you may have missed is that at the beginning of the episode, before Daenerys went full fire and blood, she told Jon that Sansa's plan was leading up to Varys getting killed. She wanted to implode Daenerys' camp, or at least this is how Dany sees it, from the inside out, and Sansa is the reason why she had to murder Varys. But what's missed about this whole situation, if you remember, in the very last episode in Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 4, Jon Snow was told by Arya and the rest of his family, well, aside from Bran, that they shouldn't trust Daenerys. Arya straight up told Jon that they shouldn't trust her, and Jon has seen what Daenerys does to people who betray her. She may have been the one to tell Jon to never tell anyone, but ultimately Sansa got off on the wrong foot with Daenerys, and I'm pretty sure Daenerys sees her as a northern threat that needs to be dealt with. And in this episode, Jon was sort of faced with the similar choice that he's gonna have to make in this next episode. He will choose the greater good or the innocence over his family. He killed a Stark bannerman in order to save an innocent King's Landing citizen. He's willing to give up the love that he has for Daenerys in order to save the greater good. He will likely realize, or get in his head at least, that Dany can't sit the Iron Throne. No matter what, even if he doesn't actually sit the Iron Throne, Daenerys cannot do this. Daenerys has completed her father, the Mad King's ultimate mission of burning them all, and in Jon's mind, Daenerys is now the greatest threat to the Seven Kingdoms. Okay, I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I'll go ahead and throw up a spoiler warning. Skip ahead like 20 seconds if you don't want to know anything about this, but I actually just mentioned it in my last video, and that was the image that I'm not showing right now of Jon Snow running his sword through Daenerys might be real. If the ending, the actual final episode of Game of Thrones really did leak nearly 2 years ago, it's gonna piss me off. Not only did I immediately hate that ending, but I really couldn't see any sort of way in which that would go down until I watched episode 5. But you know what? I spent enough time on this. There's a lot can happen in the next episode. Let's go ahead and move on. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the amount of death that was in this episode. We lost a bunch of innocents, but we also lost some heavy hitters to the cast. We lost Sandor the Mountain, Jaime, and Cersei. Everyone that died in this episode, we kind of knew it was coming, and yes, I did enjoy watching Cersei die, but I will say that the writers of those scenes, it was sort of like a kick to the nuts. I actually, for the very last time, felt sorry for Cersei. Even though she did everything she did. That's just how great this show is. They can make you still hate someone, but then feel pity for them. Like, they know how to pull the heartstrings. I actually felt sorry for Cersei up until the point when she died. And the fact that she died in Jaime's arms was extremely poetic. I think, I saw a lot of people sort of asking this, and I was sort of wondering this. I guess this is something that's missed. They're dead. They're crushed by the rocks. There's no way they survive that unless Bronn shows up last second and pushes them both out of the way, and then speaking of which, what happened with that, or what's gonna happen with that? Jaime's already dead. He really doesn't have any reason at all to kill Tyrion because he can't be paid by the queen who's currently lying under a rock. I just hope they don't do something crazy with his character, like throw him in the last episode and he shows up and like shoots Tyrion with that crossbow or something. He really wouldn't have any motivation to do that. And speaking of Tyrion, and this may be something that you might have missed, is that Tyrion committed his very last act of treason. Daenerys told him at the beginning of this episode that the next time he steps out of line or does anything down the betrayal sorts, he will be murdered. Well, he let Jaime out, and Daenerys will find out about this by those same Dothraki soldiers that saw Tyrion go in. Now, mind you, Tyrion letting Jaime loose actually did no harm to Daenerys, but she's not going to see it that way. Tyrion will likely die in this next episode. Now, props to me and anyone else who guessed it, but it was sort of obvious that the only way Tyrion would actually betray Daenerys would be something like letting his brother out of prison. Jaime has done this for him, and history repeats itself, so I'm pretty sure this will be what Daenerys considers Tyrion's final act of treason. And if you're like me, you're probably wondering on what that trickle effect will be, and I think it's safe to say that Jon and Daenerys may not end up together by the end of this, and if Jon is forced to make a decision, like I said at the earlier beginning part of this video, Jon will kill Daenerys. He probably won't even hesitate, and I don't know if that means he's gonna have to take out Drogon as well, but I'm in genuine fear for my queen's life, like I was this entire episode, but this time I think she may be murdered by someone close to her. Now, what's interesting is that, it's not really interesting, it's terrible. What Daenerys is doing is systematically going through, and in this next episode, or this last episode of Game of Thrones, sorry, that's still, I'm still wrapping my head around that. Make sure you subscribe, because I'll always make Game of Thrones videos, but what's gonna probably happen in the final episode is Daenerys will deal with Tyrion, he will be killed, and then she will confront Jon about what he's going to do of the North. Jon will, of course, be like, what do you mean? They're my family. I think they should stay in the North, and we should leave every single person that's up there fire free. Daenerys is basically becoming Tywin, or maybe even like Thanos. You remember how Thanos switches his plan to wanting to destroy all of life instead of half of life, so no one can sort of reminisce on what they lost. Maybe this is Daenerys' plan. Anyone who may potentially want Jon to be the king, or just want to sort of reminisce about the past, i.e. Tyrion, Daenerys will have to wipe that slate clean. Now, earlier early in the episode, you may have missed this, but if Jon had just given Dany some dick, then maybe he could have prevented all of this. But no, seriously, Daenerys says that she doesn't have anything over here. She's lost it all. She does not have the love. Jon confirms this by basically rejoring her. He turned her into Mrs. Friendzone, letting her know that, yes, I have love for you. And she goes, is that all? And he doesn't answer. He could have easily spoke up and been like, I'm a little bit confused right now. I just found out you're my aunt. I also found out that I'm the heir to the Iron Throne. We just had to kill a massive army of the dead. After all that, we didn't get a chance to chill. We came straight down here and had to take out Cersei. And after all that, we haven't taken a chance to just chill, get some me and you time. He could have said anything along those lines, but he doesn't. He just leaves that stupid, awkward, stark pause, and then the worst assumptions are had. Like the whole time during that scene, the song from Drake was stuck in my head. I'm gonna need you to say something, baby. Oh. Like, no, for real, Jon, that pause just cost you thousands of innocent lives, bro. Just speak up. It's like these two are playing the most dangerous game of will they, won't they? And yes, it's a pleasure to always watch Emilia Clarke and Kit Harington on screen and in a scene together, but that was painful. I can guarantee you that was the last moment of weakness that we will see from Daenerys in this series. And speaking of moment of weakness, I as a viewer had a moment of weakness, and I sort of briefly touched on it earlier in this video and also on my live stream, but Cersei, I went into this episode 1,000,000,000% Dracarys on her. I wanted her to die some brutal way, and the show did what it was famous for, not only subverting your expectations, but also making you feel for someone who you should have no emotions towards, other than that person needs to die immediately. When Qyburn walks up to Cersei and tells her, they need to go, the Dragon Queen is here, they're gonna die, and Cersei just kept repeating, this is the Red Keep is the safest place. That was when I felt my eyes start to well up. I was like, oh man, she's in shock. She doesn't realize that she's about to die. And old Cersei, I feel like, was a bit of a stronger version of Cersei. She was willing to die, but it would be on her own terms. This Cersei was in such fear and shock that she's broken down. She's pregnant, so she's not only fighting for her own life, but also the life of her innocent child. But also, she was just in shock in the sense that she had, this massive army, and she thought, there's no way I could lose, and then quickly that gets turned around. Before, she was willing to poison herself and Tommen, but this time she was just in too much fear. And I think that's why I felt more for her in those scenes. And typically, I, want the evil, the bad guy to get their just desserts, but the fact that Cersei showed so much fear and was pulled off in such a believable way by Lena Headey, it was painful to watch. And at least she got to die in the arms of Jaime, the one person who's arguably truly loved her. Now, I spent a bunch of time complaining about stuff that I didn't enjoy as much from this episode and stuff and things that you may have missed, but I want to spend pretty much the majority of the rest of this video talking about the moments that I just absolutely loved and were probably on the top 3 greatest moments of the TV show, alongside Jon Snow and Daenerys riding dragons, was Euron's bitch-ass fleet getting destroyed. Yeah, that's right, PP Boy got everything he knew blown to ashes. I kind of wish they had shown him getting burned with the ship, like we got to see his charred corpse, but he did ultimately die in the episode, and for that I am thankful. Another thing that I enjoyed about this episode, again, relates to the vengeance in Daenerys, at least the first part of her burning King's Landing. When she was burning all those Lannister troops and the Golden Company getting wiped out the way they did, I don't think I've ever been quite that excited for someone getting brutally murdered on this TV show before. I also like the way that they did what they're famous for, but in a way where what I consider myself a veteran watcher, everything that they have done on this show I feel like I'm aware of, and especially subverting tropes. I feel like they hit a double whammy and out of the pack in this episode. I mean, not only did we sort of feel bad for Cersei, but we also, us true Daenerys fans that really can't see her doing anything wrong, I'm pretty sure there's a good chunk of us that question what she will do next and if we really want her to sit the Iron Throne at this point. I mean, I'm not saying what she did was right by any means, but you have to understand that she wasn't really given any choices, and the way that it was written is pretty believable to her acting this way. I mean, just think about it. The 2 advisors that she has alive betrayed her, and the one person, Missandei, that would maybe have advised her to do something differently just died, and her dying words were Dracarys. Jorah literally died in her arms arms. Viserion died right next to her, and she watched Missandei beheaded. Not only was she given no time to properly grieve and go through the different emotions of losing someone, but also they happened right in front of her. The difference, and I think the reason why Jon was sort of acting this way and hesitant about them killing the innocent Lannisters, remember they had like a bit of a standoff in the episode where Jon got them to surrender by, they didn't really say any words, but the Lannister soldiers dropped their swords, and Jon, you could tell, was relieved about that situation. The reason why Jon doesn't feel as strongly about Cersei the same way Daenerys does is because the one person who Cersei's caused them a lot of pain, but Ned died right there in the capital. Cersei had her hand all up in that pot. Jon didn't actually witness it. He heard about it secondhand. If we switch this situation around and Sansa was the one who went down to King's Landing, then I'm pretty sure she would have had her troops go out and kill the Lannister soldiers. She's almost been raped in King's Landing, and her pain and turmoil goes a lot deeper than Jon's. This is why the writers chose us to portray the horror that Daenerys was committing in King's Landing off on Jon. He had never really seen that side of her before, and at this point, the only battles that he fought are against the dead and against people who took over his home and destroyed everything he's held dear. Cersei has done this yet, but Jon doesn't have as deep of connections as Sansa and Daenerys does to King's Landing. Now, I just want to wrap this video up by proposing a question with a bit of a statement to y'all. Let me know what you think and what your biggest gripes were down below in the comment section. I want to see if we agree. I am now making it my mission to hear as many opinions as possible in this fandom so that I can do my job and correctly articulate not only how I feel, but also how the fandom interprets this episode and what you all think is going to happen. Also, all the Daenerys diehard fans like me, let me know down below, how does this make you feel about her future? If you're like me, it's pretty uncertain. I just hope she doesn't die. There's no coming back from basically killing most of the citizens in King's Landing, but if this show can give Cersei a redemption arc and make us at least feel some sort of pity for her in the end, then I'm pretty sure that would be no problem with trying to make Daenerys come off that way. I feel like in the preview, since we really only see the first 10 seconds of the episode, there is something that eventually happens that maybe makes Daenerys and Jon Snow's relationship salvageable. I feel like if there's a bit of a time jump and everybody's given a chance to clear their heads, like maybe Daenerys allows Jon to go and speak with his family, they have a bit of a time apart, and then Jon, the light bulb goes off, like, why don't we get married? Literally, I don't want the Iron Throne, you can have it. Let's settle this by marrying our house together. With us being allied that way, then you don't have to worry about Sansa or anything else like that from the north. Now, I just want to say that every single season when Game of Thrones comes out, at least the seasons that I've covered here on this YouTube channel, there's always the critics that say they don't enjoy it, and that's 100% fine. We're all entitled to our own opinions. One thing I've learned is that no matter how bad you think the season is, it always gets better when you go back and rewatch it from start to finish. Now, just imagine how good this season will look when you go back and start the entire series over from season 1. I'll probably pay a little less attention to the White Walker storyline. Alright, and with that being said, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as a like goal is going to be 20,420. Also, make sure you subscribe. We are so close to hitting 100,000, and it's my job to keep you entertained throughout this long night. Super special shout out to every single person watching this video, and a super special thank you to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunt's Review. And just as a bit of a side rant, I wanted to break up me talking so much about Daenerys and Jon in this video with my outro. But if Jon does decide to turn on the queen and go against her wishes, which likely could be murdering more innocents or worse, threatening his family, I mean, what is he going to do about Drogon? That's like literally the biggest dragon the kingdoms have ever seen, and that's not going to go over well if Jon decides to murder Drogon's mother. I mean, you know what? It's going to be a long episode, and it's going to be the last episode, and I'm pretty sure we're going to get a bunch of sweet to go along with that bitter. Hopefully most of the bitter from the bittersweet ending happened in this episode. I mean, it can't get much worse, right? The greatest series that has ever existed on television, or really, you know, in movies, or just anything ever. I just watched the ending of it, and to be honest, I don't really know how to feel. I mean, there were several moments that I thoroughly enjoyed, and it were some of the greatest moments of the series, but also there were several moments that I think I think we all know what I'm getting at here. Daenerys died in a way in which I may have been accepting of her death if it was done the right way, or I guess I should say my way. And that's something that I'm I'm going to try to remind myself throughout this entire video. As fans, the showrunners and the actors and every person involved with Game of Thrones doesn't owe us shit. Well, let me rephrase that. We are longtime fans of the show, and we feel as though we deserve some sort of ending that everyone can agree on. And while I may not agree with some of the major choices that were taken during the finalizing of characters arcs in the writer's room table, there were still several moments from this episode and from this series finale, man, still sort of sinking in, but there are still several moments that I enjoyed, and in this video, I want to discuss those moments as well as some things you may or may not have missed. Let's begin. Now, before we get started, please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be, this is the last episode of the series here that I'm reviewing. Let's shoot for a like goal of 50,000. 420. Also, make sure you subscribe. The Long Night is here, and it's my job to keep you entertained. And lastly, make sure you have your notifications turned on, so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Long Night. Now, the first thing that I want to discuss is something that's of the utmost importance, and I feel like I need to get through it before we can get on through some of the events that I enjoyed and things that you missed from the episode. And that which I'm referring to is the fact of Daenerys has died, and me as a fan, my disappointment, and the reason why I think that that was a bad writing choice. Wait, you know what? I already told not a bad writing choice, just something that I don't agree with story-wise. Now, being 100% honest, a lot of people actually enjoyed the way that Daenerys' character arc went. Me being a super fan of hers and wanting her to sit the Iron Throne and make her entire character arc actually worth something in the end is sort of the reason why I feel a bit disappointed. I feel shortchanged. I feel robbed. Daenerys got stabbed in the stomach while being kissed from Jon Snow. Jon had just been talked to by Tyrion, and what Tyrion told Jon about who Daenerys was truly as a person became true when Jon and Daenerys had their conversation. The main reason why I take issue with this is because Jon had just gotten done arguing with Tyrion, telling him that we have to give Dany a chance. You stood by her for this entire time. People stood by her for this long because she's got some good in her. She's not her father. Then Jon proceeds to go and have a conversation face to face with Daenerys, and then it seems as though he just chucks that whole vibe of giving her a second chance out the window. And that right there, that is the exact reason, or that's my gripe with the writing choices. And in this one in particular, I feel as though they're subverting tropes right after just creating the trope that they subverted in the first place. It doesn't make any sense. It seems as though they're making characters do things out of their nature just for spite, just so everyone can sort of keep on their toes. You can't know what's gonna happen if no one knows what they're gonna do. And then a light turned on. These characters, who we've spent such a long time with, are not the same as who they were in the beginning. They're not even the same as who they were last season. The main reason being is because they've been through so much. These last two wars, the one with Cersei for the Iron Throne and the one with the living versus the dead, has sort of put everything into perspective for them, especially for Jon Snow. He's willing to trade his love for death, and that's one of the things that you may or may not have missed. Most likely you didn't, but when Tyrion tells Jon in that conversation that basically you have to choose duty over love sometimes, this is direct foreshadowing to him stabbing Daenerys. And another thing that made it pretty obvious that this is what he was going to do is the fact that he had his sword on him. The shots of Longclaw being present in almost every single scene that Jon was in this episode was a big clue, in my opinion, to what was going to happen. And another thing that was a big foreshadowing to how Daenerys was going to be viewed as pretty much a full-on dragon in this episode was when she first emerges to give the Dothraki and the Unsullied that legendary speech. There's a shot of Drogon's wings that line up perfectly with Daenerys' body. It's letting us know that she's become full-on dragon or full-on monster and is no longer able to keep her dark impulses at bay. She embraced the fire and blood, and in my opinion, the main reason why Jon decided to stab her was when he first walked up. Before he could even get anything else, Daenerys immediately starts telling him a story of her youth, not even feeling a tiny bit remorseful over the fact that she murdered thousands of innocent children. This is why Jon opens up his mouth the way he does and starts yelling at her. Now, obviously, I hated every agonizing moment of watching Daenerys lose and draw her last breath on screen, but what followed up of Drogon arriving and then burning the Iron Throne to ash, I could totally relate with. In those moments, and when I first watched this scene, I really wanted him to turn that fire on Jon and burn him as well. If him and Daenerys both died in that scene, that would have been even more poetic, and I would have felt as though some justice was served for the assassination of the queen. And another thing that frustrates me, not necessarily with the writing of that scene, but just with the sort of choices that Jon Snow as a character makes. He just preaches to Tyrion about how he needs to give Daenerys a second chance, and then Jon fully makes up his mind and decides to end everything with Daenerys then. I guess the main reasoning behind that is because he's saw what she was capable of, and he felt like if he hadn't have taken care of her right then and there, not only would he not get another chance, but also she would do what she did to King's Landing to Winterfell. But getting back on track on what I was saying about Drogon, one thing you may have missed of why he did the thing that he did and not kill Jon Snow is because immediately upon arrival, he smelt Jon Snow's blood on the dagger. He looked over to the Iron Throne and realized that this, in his mind, was the reason why Jon killed Daenerys. He also saw Jon and Daenerys making out, and he knew that the two of them were in love. He felt like if he let Jon Snow live with the guilt of killing the one woman he loved, that was way more punishment than burning him to the ground. So props to Drogon for being a freaking genius. And I also want to mention a theory that I was sort of working out during my live stream. Speaking of which, if you hadn't already watched that, go check the link down below in the description or the link right up here, and that'll take you straight to that live stream breakdown. But my theory is that in the successor shows, the timeline is supposed to be, it's going to be called The Long Night, and we think we know the true story of how it started, but this series is going to explore the actual way that it started. Now, from what we know, the cast doesn't really appear to be too Targaryen-ish, but I'm pretty sure we're going to get some Valyrians from around this time period. And what I'm getting at here is I think there may be some sort of shrine in the Temple of R'hllor in Volantis that will maybe be explored in one of the successor shows. If that's the case, then, we could sort of get it confirmed that Melisandre and Thoros weren't the only ones who could resurrect the dead, and that other Red Priests and Priestesses have done it before. Then maybe what Drogon did was immediately fly Daenerys over to Essos, and more specifically into Volantis, and drop her at the Temple of R'hllor. We do know that dragons are way more intelligent than humans in this series, and he has been exploring the ancient ruins of Valyria for a while. If there's a way to bring back Daenerys, I'm pretty sure he'd be the one to figure it out, and maybe, just maybe, there'll be a spin-off or a movie where Daenerys comes back and destroys all of the Seven Kingdoms with Drogon and maybe some of his children. Alright, perhaps the tinfoil is a little bit too strong on that one, but one more thing I want to mention before getting on to more easily missed things was, no matter what your issues or what my issues may be with the final season of the television series, they set out to do something, and they actually completed that rather successfully. They adapted the unadaptable, and they turned what is arguably the greatest fantasy series of all time into the greatest television series of all time. The task that the two of these individuals took on was pretty daunting, and they did a pretty bang up job of wrapping things up and bringing this journey full circle. Like, obviously, my least favorite moment of the entirety of the series was the moment when Daenerys died, but the only reason why that scene made me feel anything was because of how well of a job they've told this story so far, and how amazing of a job Emilia Clarke has done acting and playing that role. The few mistakes they made along the way, or in my mind, the differences in idea of where the story was going that I have in my head versus what we actually got on screen, outweigh how well and how awesome of a job they've done. And that's two good things that could come up with that. If you didn't like the show and you don't want Dan and Dave anywhere near it, well then they can't ruin the show anymore because it's over. And also, if you did enjoy the show and you most likely enjoyed the earlier seasons, you now get to watch those, rewatch those all the way without having to wait an entire year to find out how the story finally ends. And also, this means I get to write as much Daenerys and Drogon fanfiction as I want to without it actually ever being contested. Now, usually this is the point in the video where I spend like the next 5 to 6 minutes sort of predicting what will happen in the next episode, but this is the end. Nothing is going to happen after this. Whatever does happen in the world of Westeros, we're going to have to wait to find out until Winds of Winter comes out, or the successor shows. Speaking of which, as of right now, it's being unofficially called The Long Night, and it's set to sort of explore more of what we didn't get much of in this final season. That being the White Walkers and the Great Others, and, figures from the Age of Heroes. Now, there were rumors that there are actually several successor shows in development, but I think as of right now, this one being centered on The Long Night is the front runner. I just hope that it has to do with a bunch of Valyrians, since we basically got to see the last of the Targaryens on this series. I would like to see more of Jon Snow and Daenerys' ancestors. Now, just sort of getting back on track here, something that I think needs to be further discussed is the fact that Bran is the one who sits the Iron Throne in the end. Now, Bran had to have known this all along, because this, in my opinion, is the same reason why Bran ends up telling Tyrion everything about his journey and where he's been. It's because that when it was all said and done, Bran knew that Tyrion would be his hand to the king. Now, I gotta say that this was definitely one of, if not the most shocking moments of the television series. I really didn't see this coming out of anywhere. There was not really any foreshadowing for it other than in season 8 in episode 3, when literally the entire purpose of the Battle of Winterfell is to protect Bran. It was in that episode when we realized that there's something more special to him, when Samwell explains to everyone that Bran is mankind's memories. One of the greatest tools that mankind has moving forward is learning learning from the mistakes of its past, and Bran, if everything were to be destroyed, then Bran would be a key figure in rebuilding society. And that's exactly what they did. So props to Dan and Dave, because not only did they subvert our expectations, but they also made it make a lot of sense. When you really think about it, if Bran had never been pushed out of the window, then this whole sort of rivalry between the Lannisters and the Starks wouldn't have really come up, which pushed on the War of the Five of the Kings, which ultimately pushed Bran out of Winterfell and north of the Wall, so that he could then discover Jon Snow's true lineage, which would ultimately push a wedge between him and Daenerys, allowing for Jon to do what he ultimately needed to do. Now, you may feel as though the last part that I just mentioned was a bit of a stretch, but we have to remember, when Dan and Dave initially started out writing this show and adapting it from the novels, they were informed by the series creator that they would have novels to sort of finish the story off of. Obviously, several choices were made, and I think a lot of those adaptations were only cut or went down a certain way because it was being adapted for television. But in the beginning, that's in my opinion why it feels like such a grand story that's going to have such a grand ending, is because initially when starting out to tell this story, it would have had a grand ending, but they've sort of just had to wing it. Now, overall, Bran becoming the king is actually the sweetest part of the sweet ending. We know that Bran is going to be able to lead the Seven Kingdoms down the right path, and the fact that he seems so emotionless throughout this whole season and actually told several characters that he doesn't really want anything is what's going to make him the greatest king the Seven Kingdoms have ever seen. Sometimes, just like we've seen in the real world, emotions can skew politics and make individuals or humans do certain things that they wouldn't normally done had their emotions not have gotten the better of them. Well, Bran has no emotions and therefore will be the greatest king the kingdoms have ever seen. Okay, maybe not better than Jaehaerys or Aegon the First, but still a pretty damn good king. I do sort of have a question with one of like his lines that he just sort of mentions all casual like, is he says that maybe I'll be able to find Drogon. That doesn't really make sense because it isn't brought up again. I don't know. I guess they're just sort of hinting at the fact that the dragons are still alive, and that's also part of the sweet ending. But the fact that it was said that Drogon went east sort of leads me into that theory that I mentioned earlier, which was maybe Drogon flew Daenerys to the Temple of R'hllor to get resurrected, and maybe in a few years she's gonna come back and kill everything, fire and blood. But all joking aside, Bran becoming the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms and the winner of the Game of Thrones is the best choice that they made story-wise for this television series. Well, one of the best. I mean, we can all say that we never saw a Stark sitting the Iron Throne in the end, aside from Jon. And also, it's been a pretty popular theory of mine that I came up with last season, and that was that maybe this whole thing ends in a democracy. Well, that's exactly what they did. Not only will Bran be the sitting king for a time, but he can't really have any children, and his offspring wouldn't naturally be elected. They decided that they will all choose the next ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, which in my opinion ensures the safety of the realms. And that leads me into another popular theory that got proven right in tonight's episode, which was the North became a sovereign kingdom. Sansa in particular, the Starks are so fed up with how torn apart their house was, they are now in a position where that will never happen again. I'm pretty sure with Sansa being the ruler of Winterfell and the queen of Winterfell, which is all she always wanted, which was, her costume was on point, she will do what's right by the newly found Northern Kingdom, and House Stark will likely rise to be one of the greatest houses in the Seven Kingdoms under direction of Sansa. Now, speaking, since we're talking about the Starks, I guess I'll go ahead and mention Arya's fate. I'm not really that too happy about what she decided to do. And she mentioned back in season 6 that she was going to go west of Westeros when this thing was all said and done, but she sort of flipped back so many times this season. I kind of hope that she would, stay and join Gendry and unite House Baratheon and House Stark like Ned and Robert wanted them to do back in season 1. And to be honest, I don't even think I have a legitimate gripe with the way Arya's storyline turned out. I think it was just more so disappointment because it didn't happen the way I wanted it to. I kind of wanted her to either go back home to Winterfell or go be with Gendry. I also wanted her to have several scenes with Nymeria and the Super PAC fighting either Cersei and the Lannisters or the Night King and the Army of the Dead, but that didn't happen. But don't get my words twisted. I am content with how Arya's journey ended. I just think that the Starks in general, as a whole, is kind of confusing because Sansa preached to all of them that the lone wolf dies but the pack survives, and then at the very end of the story, every single Stark sort of splits off and goes in its own direction. Well, if we look at it from another perspective, they did stay together for a long time, and this whole season they worked together, and that ultimately got them to the point where they could safely split up and not have to worry about their house being destroyed. So the pack did survive. Would you all let me know what you think about Arya's conclusion and Sansa's conclusion, and Bran's as well, down below in the comment section. I guess lastly for House Stark and lastly for this video really is Jon Snow. I saw a lot of people really confused about what was actually happening, and upon my first viewing I was as well, until I realized that Jon became the king beyond the wall. When he left with the wildlings, he wasn't just leaving to sort of go on a ranging mission. Every single one of the wildlings went with him, and I feel like he was leading them to a new place to live. That's funny. There's almost a Stark ruling in every direction. Jon in the true north of the wall, Sansa in the north, Winterfell, Arya to the west, which she left with a bunch of Stark bannerman ships, and then Bran to the south. Now, the last thing that I want to quickly discuss for this video is something that I've already briefly touched on, so I won't spend too much time on, and that's Daenerys. In her death, and as painful as it was for me to watch on screen, and it's funny, if you did watch that live stream, you could see I almost broke down into tears at the very beginning of it, and at several moments throughout, but the one thing that she wanted to do, break the wheel, she successfully completed in her death. Tyrion puts it the best way. When he's giving that speech to everyone about how Bran should be the king, he tells Grey Worm that Daenerys wanted to destroy the wheel, and the way they can do it after her death and to keep her memory alive is by electing a leader. The one thing that terrorized the Seven Kingdoms was lineage, and now that they are destroying that, so to speak, by putting a democracy of sorts in the works, then that means Daenerys' journey wasn't pointless and she can actually rest in peace. Now, you all let me know down below in the comment section what your biggest gripes with this episode were. With this being the last episode of the series, I plan on making probably like 100 videos on the subject. If there's something you feel I missed in this video, then please believe me that it will likely be covered in one of my up and coming videos. And with that being said, alright, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be an insane number of 50,420. Also, make sure you're subscribed and then turn your notifications on, as it's my job to keep you entertained throughout this long night. Super special shout out to every single person watching this video, and a super special thank you to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name's Mark and this has been Sir Hunt's Review. The ending of Game of Thrones fared pretty well for the Starks. Literally every single one of them is in a position of power or in a position where they chose to put themselves, being Jon or Arya. But Daenerys, my queen, the, in my eyes, rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms and the one person who is to thank for this democracy and the wheel being broken, was never really quite served justice. Now, you could argue that Jon being sent to the wall was some form of justice, but in all actuality, Jon Snow never wanted the Iron Throne, and sending him to the wall just made sure that that would never happen. In this video, I want to discuss what may have gone down when Drogon flew off with Daenerys' body. Everyone said he was spotted flying east, and we all know that there's a temple in Volantis in the east that is the largest temple dedicated to R'hllor. And the followers of R'hllor are super famous for several things, one of them being resurrection. Now, as always, let's begin. Now, before we get started, please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 10,420. Also, this is the most important part. Make sure you're subscribed. Now that the long night is officially here, I promise that I will continue to make a Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones content pretty much forever. Also, make sure every notification's turned on, so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Long night. Now, before we really get into the premise of, or the idea, my ideas of what actually happened to Daenerys' body and what may happen, I want to talk a bit about the spin-offs, because I feel like whatever successor show we get that comes out after Game of Thrones, if it's not a direct spin-off of a Game of Thrones, then it's going to hint at sort of what the fate of Daenerys may be. Now, obviously, it could take place in the past, but one idea that I brought up during my live stream and also on my Game of Thrones Season 8 finale breakdown, speaking of which, you can click right here for the live stream, and you can also click right here for the Episode 6 Explained video. But anyway, what I mentioned briefly in those videos, I'm going to sort of expand on here. Now, I think there could be a potential for this spin-off series. You know, it's being called The Long Night, and now it's supposedly being switched to being called Blood Moon, but the cast is still the same, has been ordered to shoot a pilot. They haven't ordered a series yet, but one way I was thinking they could sort of finagle in, you know, Daenerys' ending into this is, of course, it takes place in the past, but since we're going to be over in Essos, we get to explore more of the ancient secrets of Essos. With George R. R. Martin having such a heavy hand in this new successor show, I'm pretty sure the lore and expansion of A Song of Ice and Fire history will take place in this show. I feel like with his hand in the pot, there's going to be less creative decision making that people who didn't actually write the story take, and George is going to make sure it's told in a way in which it reflects how great his novels are. Like, for instance, part of the premise of this new spinoff is going to be Naomi Watts' character is supposed to play a socialite with a deep dark secret. Now, let's say that's over in Essos, and part of her secret is that she somehow lives forever. Maybe there's some sort of, now this is just highly speculation here, and when I put it into fanfic, fiction format, it'll be a lot more poetic, but what if there's some sort of way that a person could extend their life way past what their actual age would... Oh, wait, shit. Melisandre did that, and she's from Essos. And I feel like if they do choose to destine this show in Essos instead of in Westeros, then one of the major cities that they could show a lot of would be Volantis. That's got one of the highest populations of the free cities, and also, if they did choose to include Volantis, then that would give us the feeling of King's Landing, but also the architecture is different, so it'll give us that similar nostalgia for Game of Thrones, but also something a little bit new and exciting. Maybe they choose to focus on the Temple of R'hllor for one episode, and in it we see how the Red Priest and Priestesses bring people back over there for maybe a certain fee. Well, if that's the case, then we could all insinuate that this is where Drogon flew off with Daenerys. Dragons are in fact extremely intelligent in this universe, and just to sort of reiterate from my last video, he knew exactly what happened between Jon Snow and Daenerys. He knew that Jon was in love with Daenerys and that he didn't kill her for no reason. He killed her for the Iron Throne. Drogon knew this and decided his final action would be to burn down the Iron Throne so no one could ever sit it. I swear, dragons in this universe are of a higher intelligence. It takes something not of a human level to just look past the point of that. I mean, it's similar to like when my cousin got shot as a kid. As all of us being young, we got mad at, the people who actually did it, the gang that was involved in it. When all actuality, I had several people explain to me that it's not necessarily the people that caused it, but the environment, the way they were brought up. And this is pretty much what Drogon did. He knew that the actual pursuit for the Iron Throne is what killed Daenerys. Jon Snow laying that dagger through her belly and into her heart is not it's not okay. I don't even know why I said that like that. It just got me all emotionally just moving on and getting back on track. Drogon knew the right thing to do in those moments, and the fact that he sort of played the judge and jury on Jon Snow and decided that the Iron Throne was guilty for the death of Daenerys leads me into believing that the reason why he took her body was in hopes to resurrect her and bring her back. He's a dragon. He knows that magic exists in this world, and he's actually, in my opinion at least, most likely aware of Jon Snow's resurrection. And I did see a lot of people saying that the reason why he decided to not burn Jon is because Jon is unburnable. He knew that he was a Targaryen and he couldn't actually set him on fire. No, the only reason why Daenerys didn't burn is because she was using blood magic to make sure that the fire didn't harm her. Jon doesn't know how to do that, and he definitely would have died if Drogon had melted his ass. And you know what? We're a good ways into this video, and it is based on Daenerys. So I just want to say, Emilia Clarke, if you ever watch this, or if anyone you know ever sees this and tells you about it, thank you for doing what you did to this character of Daenerys Stormborn. I mean, I've been upset about losing people before, but never for a fictional world. Last night, after making the video and doing that live stream, I couldn't go to sleep. I literally stayed up till like 11:30 in the morning just thinking of many different ways that you could be brought back, or just waiting for some sort of article to be posted saying, look, Dan and Dave did an interview with Emilia Clarke and she is dead, but there's a chance that she could be brought back and maybe she'll be mentioned as one of the actors or actresses for the spinoff. Obviously that's not going to happen, but that's part of the stages of grief that I was going through. The denial. I refused to believe that it actually happened, and then that's when I realized that there's really no chance to ever see her again on screen, and that just made me start crying again. So I just want to say it one more time. Thank you, Emilia, Isabel, Euphemia, Rose, Clarke. While I may not agree with every single writing direction they took with her in this last season, you did an amazing job of bringing this character to life and pulling off something that really has never been done before. I mean, your character starting out being forced into something that she never really wanted and then ended up getting raped in the process, came up from literally nothing into the greatest queen the Seven Kingdoms have ever seen. And I know there's probably several people watching this video that are like, hey man, stop dick riding. You've done it for like 3 minutes now, but listen here. If you're upset that Emilia, or Daenerys rather, burned King's Landing to the ground, one thing you have to realize is that Bran, who is currently the new king of the Seven Kingdoms, had to have seen this happen and just let it happen. Bran the Broken can see the past, future, and the present, so there's no way he didn't know that Daenerys would basically nuke King's Landing. He knew that that had to happen in order for the wheel to be broken and in order for this newly found democracy to be installed into the capital of Westeros. But just to sort of change the subject and calm myself down a little bit, one way that I see maybe the prequel series going down is sort of hinting at what Daenerys' fate may be in the lightest sense of the word. I mean, we do know that she's dead, but that could sort of hint at what Drogon did with her body. Is in the spinoff, it was initially going to be called, The Long Night, which was going to take place at the very end of the Age of Heroes. Now, the thing is, we literally just saw a modern day, so to speak, version of the Age of Heroes throughout the entirety of Game of Thrones. All 8 seasons was a giant Heroes hero's journey, and almost every single person alive at the end, Jon, Arya, Sansa, Daenerys, Bran, well, Daenerys for the most part, is a hero that will be listed in the history books as the saviors of their time. So what if instead of a spin-off, we get a successor show that's very similar to what just happened in Westeros, except for it takes place at another place in another time, but characters who existed, like Arya, Bran, Jon Snow, Sansa, Daenerys, Samwell, they all had their counterparts in the first Age of Heroes, so maybe this show takes place right after the first Age of Heroes when all those heroes have died, and it sort of just feels very reminiscent, or what it would be in Game of Thrones after Sam, Jon, Daenerys, and everyone else has already died in Westeros. Maybe this new show will sort of take place right after that, making it feel somewhat like a successor show, but completely new and fresh, as the formula would have changed. Now, speaking of formula changing, one thing that I forgot to mention in my live stream on my last breakdown video was that this ending had a bunch of Lord of the Rings shoutouts. Now, the fact of all the Starks sort of getting on ships and heading in different directions, that's very reminiscent of Aragorn, Gimli, Frodo, and Gandalf all getting on the boats to go off to the never-ending or never-dying lands. And then Drogon destroying the Iron Throne was a giant callback to Frodo destroying the Ring of Power. Drogon realized in those moments that the Iron Throne does nothing but corrupt people and make them power hungry. So him melting down the Iron Throne was very reminiscent of Frodo throwing the Ring of Power into the fires of Mount Doom. And Daenerys, like Smeagol, became corrupted to the point of no return by power itself. She died in pursuit of the Iron Throne, just like Smeagol in pursuit of the Ring of Power. But just sort of getting back onto the main point of this video, now that I've had time to think about it and I've watched the episode several times, I actually think that this was a beautiful ending and they kind of couldn't have done it any better. We all know we had to lose Jon or Daenerys, and me being a super massive fan of Daenerys, I was pretty heartbroken when she died. I couldn't see past my own anger and realized that the writing in this episode was actually on fucking point. And no, I don't agree with every single direction they took, but overall, this ending was pretty phenomenal. If I put my bias aside, then Daenerys, being the Mad Queen, has had foreshadowing this entire series. Everything she does to sort of put herself in a better position, while she doesn't mean to intentionally harm the innocent, it does sort of seem as though it's becoming more and more drastic. She ended up falling in love with the power that she took to give her her true destiny, and that's what ultimately destroyed her. The fact that Jon Snow, who was the one man that still loved her left in the world, was the one to do it was really beautiful. And, you know, like I mentioned earlier, I do believe that Drogon had a plan with Daenerys' corpse, and he flew her off somewhere to potentially, hopefully, get resurrected. There's a chance that he could fly her directly to the Temple of Atlantis, and all those red priests, out of all of them there, priests and priestesses, one of them has to have the ability to resurrect the woman they chose to fulfill the prophecy. Maybe in the end, Daenerys does come back and realize that she lost so much that she should have never left to Westeros to begin with. She should have ruled in the Bay of Dragons, and we have to remember this is where her people are actually from. Valyrians originally hailing from Essos. She was more accepted and more welcomed there, and she would have never had to do something like burn a city to the ground just to put herself in a position of power to help everyone. Maybe if she does come back, she decides to stay there and rule with Dario. Now, like I have mentioned before, I do plan on writing a bunch of Drogon and Daenerys fan fiction and picking up with the premise that Daenerys was in fact resurrected, and I want to start by, you know, sort of writing the first few episodes of it, of Daenerys building up her army to go back and take the Seven Kingdoms. So you all let me know down below if that's something that you would be interested in, and if you will be, leave a comment and I'll get started on it right away. I've actually already written the first few episodes, and it starts with Daenerys heading straight to the north to go and kill Jon. Basically, Daenerys becomes the Lady Stoneheart in my story. Alright, and with that being said, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 10,420. Also, make sure to subscribe. The long night is here, and I will continue to entertain you all throughout this long night. Also, make sure every notification's turned on, so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Super special shout out to every single person watching, and a super special thank you to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/reviews. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name's Mark and Spencer Hunts Reviews.